321, 321.
Good evening, everyone. At 6 p.m, I think we're live. I'm just looking for the nod. We're live. So welcome to another scintillating evening in the town hall. Tonight's Scrutiny Panel, 9th of July 2024. Okay, thanks for members of the public for coming along. Always welcome in here to have your say and to observe. If that's all you wish to do, that's absolutely cool. There are no practice evacuations planned for this evening. If you do hear an alarm, then let's just in an orderly fashion, make our way downstairs to the main staircase or the side staircase and rendezvous in the rear car park area in St Rumwold Street. This meeting is being streamed live. It's also going to be available on demand for the future for us to all be held accountable for what we say and do in these meetings, which is great. Discreet use of mobile phones is absolutely fine, but if it goes off, then it's a big fine for the Mayor's charity. We like that. We will probably have a break at 7:30. I am very conscious that last year's scrutiny, sometimes due to the inability of the chairman to keep control of the meeting, it went on quite a while, and I'm going to do my best to keep us reined in. So we will have a break at 7:30, but I don't envisage that we're going to be here at 10 o'clock tonight. Who knows? I am Councillor Darius Laws. I am a rural North Ward Conservative councillor, and I'm going to allow the panel to introduce themselves shortly. We have substitutions. We have Councillor Parsons here, all the way from Mersey, taking over from Councillor Willits, who couldn't be here tonight, and Councillor Smalls, back because you liked it so much last year, as well as substituting for Councillor Law. Let's have introductions around the table, please, starting over there on my left, please.
Okay, Councillor Simon Appleton, Highwoods Ward.
Councillor Vanessa Moffat, Mile End Ward.
Councillor Faith Smalls, Old Heath, The Hive and Rowhedge.
Lee Scordis, Councillor for Old Heath and Rowhedge.
Martin Parsons, Councillor for Mersey and Pyfleet.
Thomas Rowe, Councillor for Rural North Ward.
Michelle Tarman, Head of Service and Support to the Chair.
Owen Howell, Democratic Services Officer.
Councillor Alison Jay, Portfolio Holder for Economic Growth and Transformation, and here for the item on KPIs.
Fiona Shipp, Parks, Countryside and Greening Operations Manager.
Thank you, everyone. Great stuff. Okay, item 3, urgent items. I'm not aware of any. There appears to be none. Item 4, declarations of interest. I have an indication.
It may be unnecessary, but I'd like to declare that I'm on the board of Colchester Commercial Holdings. I do have a question later, might be relevant.
Okay, thanks for that. Lovely. We move on to minutes. We have, I think, 2 sets of minutes to approve for this meeting. I read them. I thought they were fantastic. Does anyone else agree that they are an accurate reflection of those 2 meetings? I propose that they are good. Councillor Rowe second. All agreed? Lovely. Then the minutes will be signed by me later on. Okay, we're moving on to general have your say, item 6. There are a number of folks who've requested to have their say, and I understand possibly Sir Bob may wish to have a say on an item we'll be discussing in some detail later on, but he might wish to do it now, but that's entirely in his gift. He's most welcome to stay for the duration of the evening if he likes. First of all, though, we do have a pre-notified statement from one of our regular contributors and keen friends of this building, Mr. Nick Chilvers, and I believe the clerk will be reading out a statement from Mr. Chilvers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Statement from Nick Chilvers on regarding agenda item 10. I'm away, hence this written submission. With Janet, I regularly walk Colchester central, urban and rural areas with our eyes open. Beyond the immediate centre, it's looking scruffy. At the April residents panel, we had a presentation from Street Care. One of the ideas to save money was to reduce the number of litter bins to encourage home recycling, their words. That went down like a lead balloon. At the June Cabinet meeting, the Fit for Purpose vision had waste services saying there will be staffing reductions. Question, really, with new and expanding neighbourhoods, removal of council assets that need to be maintained. Is that a different way of saying getting rid of litter bins? And put a greater focus on community activity, also described as community enabling approach. Question, who will be the organiser, drumming up support, managing the rotas? Will it be ward councillors or overstretched wardens? On the subject of greening, realising that there is a crossover between county and city. Question, is the no mow may an official policy? When did we get told? There seems to be no pattern, all very hit and miss. We can't tell what is deliberate rewilding and not just left scruffy. Question, if areas are going to be turned over to rewilding, couldn't we at least be told what to expect and where? Wivenhoe have done it well with informative notices. Weeds are around like never before. Question, what is the position on the use of weed killers? Objectives for these departments talk about delivering services that match the changing needs of Colchester and delivering within the financial envelope, also known as the budget. Question, can we have examples of changes that need less street care? It finishes with communication strategy. Report says communications and behavioural change are key to success. Residents are paying higher council taxes and getting, by stealth, a reduction of services. People are grumpy. Asking people with a broom and pair of shears to pitch in will be a tall order. Who in the cabinet wants to put their name to that? In case you are wondering, yes, the Chilvers can claim to do their bit along our road, but very few do. As an acknowledgement of reputational risk, there will be. The city has some excellent capital schemes in the pipeline. Key areas and tourist assets will be enhanced, but that will be undermined if street services are underfunded, visual impressions are paramount, housekeeping matters. If gateway routes are a mess, visitors will be turned off. Footfall and spend will fall. If neighbourhoods are uncared for by the council, residents will think, if they can't be bothered, why should we? Ditto businesses. That might not be fair, but that's the reality. Don't fall for clever words and high-minded wishful thinking. The Levelling Up Department and street services must work together. I suggest the council raise the leisure services budget to keep standards up. I'll pick up on this meeting on YouTube. I look forward to hearing some answers and Scrutiny coming up with similar questions. Statement ends.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chilvers, for that statement. And we do have the pleasure of having the portfolio holder here this evening, who no doubt would probably want to personally address some of those concerns, because I know he takes a keen interest in housekeeping matters. I think we'll probably wait until that moment, if that's okay. It does make sense. And just a short comment, really. The weeds out there are pretty epic at the moment because it's hot and it's raining all the time, and I am really struggling with my allotment. But we'll get on to the thrust of the conversation and the sentiment from Mr. Chilvers later on. Okay. Do we have any other members of the public? I think we probably do. I see Mr. Short.
Okay, I think this committee, the strategy and the scrutiny committee, is one of the most important meetings of the council because it looks at what the council does and finds and investigates what's done wrong. I've worked in over 40 countries and done a lot of travelling around by aeroplane, and one of my favourite programmes is something called Air Crash Investigates, where they look when things go wrong, find out what's going wrong and make arrangements to put this right. Now, your predecessor, who unfortunately isn't here, Councillor Willits, promised me that when all of the legal matters were settled between Colchester Borough Council, or now Colchester City Council, and Essex County Council over the Alumno development, that they would be, under the work programme of this committee, an investigation into how that was handled, what went wrong, and what lessons we can learn from it. I mean, the first thing that is of concern is the cost and the ramification of the appeal from the developer to the council. Why did that happen? Why did the appeal happen? Followed by the embarrassment and the cost of the discussion and a disagreement with with Essex County Council. The failure for the City Council to recognise the promises that had been made and the legal implications about the use of the site, not about the development itself, but about the use of the site, which had been sold by Essex County Council to the Borough Council on the basis of a set of agreements, some of which were incorporated in the deed of the site and some of which were inside documents. In the end, the development didn't take place, so that's a waste of all of the money that was taken. The failures included the right of appeal by the developer. The failures were enormous, from the failure of the planning department to meet their own code of practice, to suppression of documents from the statutory authority, the Design Council, and, as I say, we were promised that there would be an investigation to look at this, what went wrong, and what we can do to avoid it in the future. The second issue I wish to raise, because I wish to raise two, is the withholding of the letter from the statutory authority, Natural England, to the planning department and the cabinet member responsible from the meeting that took place to agree the local plan. The letter from the statutory authority said that they required, for a decision to be made, there needed to be more investigation, that they would oppose the building of land on the Middlewick Ranges at the time, and that they would oppose, they reserved the right to oppose any planning application that was made on the site. And that letter was withheld, and I believe the Scrutiny Committee should scrutinise that decision and decide whether it was the right decision and whether it impacted upon the decision of the council at the time. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Short. I'm going to look to the leader on the first issue because I understand that potentially matters aren't settled legally, and that's why we're not able to do this right now. But I'm looking at the leader to see if he knows, or if you do not know, I'm going to look to the clerk to get clarity on whether the monitoring officer has given us the very latest information on where this is at. Because I understand what you're saying, Mr. Short. You're very concerned about the process. You don't want it to happen again, and you think that there was a reputational and relationship problem in between local authorities and outwardly for Colchester corporately. So I completely get it. Mr. Clark first, perhaps. Do you want to give me an update on the monitoring officer?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. On that item, I've actually discussed that with the monitoring officer at the start of this municipal year, as it has been an item that has been waiting for scrutiny consideration. The monitoring officer has confirmed that we are still in a contractual relationship with Alumno, and therefore, if the scrutiny panel were at this stage to wish to have an item looking into this, it would have to be done in confidential session and it wouldn't be open to the public.
Is that your understanding, leader? I know you're not on mic at the moment, so sorry to bring you in, but if you give me the nod, I'm happy to take that. Is that your understanding? Okay. I therefore suggest, Mr. Short, that it is prudent to wait until we get that out, that moment of conclusion, because it would be better to have the scrutiny in an open environment. You're welcome to respond on that if you like.
Well, just to say I'm 80, and sooner or later I'm going to die. I get the feeling that this is being used as an excuse, that it's being kicked into the long grass in order for the embarrassment to those involved to be glossed over. I mean, I do know that the brief given by the cabinet to the negotiators to negotiate the agreement with Alumno differed significantly from the agreement that was finally signed, and that there was no reference back to the cabinet for that to be done. And that is at the core of all of the problems that exist between ourselves and Essex County Council. So I hope that this is going to be cleared up quickly. I hope that the Scrutiny Committee are going to keep asking why this is taking such a long time, because I believe this issue, you know, eventually there'll only be 3 people who understand it, because the rest of us will all be dead.
Take comfort in knowing that Councillor Willits and I are intending to be on this committee and on this planet until at least May next year. So we will do our best for you. On your second point, and I must move quickly because we've got a lot to get through tonight. On your second point, I will ask, and I'm doing it right now live, for the portfolio holder who looks after planning to give a very small formal note to me as chairman of this panel about the status of that letter in the context of Middle Wick. That's on my mind, isn't it? Middle Mill, but Middle Wick. And if indeed I will speak with colleagues here, and if we feel like we can make that a work item, we will. But I'm doing it now. I'm asking her formally now for a note to come across.
Thank you. That's great.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Short. Okay. Do we have any other members of the public wishing to speak? I see Sir Bob Russell.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an agenda item later, Middle Mill, but I'd like to speak at this juncture. Today is day 212 since the weir collapsed, and this report makes it clear that the first anniversary will arrive without pedestrians and cyclists using Middle Mill. I regret that the report is incomplete. There's no mention of the council's statutory duty to protect conservation areas. We've got Northbridge and Riverside cottages, which are listed buildings, and there's no mention of that. And on on item number 10, bullet point 10, there's reference to a confidential background document. So therefore, everybody sitting around the table has got a full pack of cards, but the general public, including myself, doesn't have a full pack of cards. I think that's not fair. It's right. I think in a public arena, we should all have all the information and not having it withheld. 1.3, the bridge is owned and managed by Essex Highways, but it would appear that Essex Highways are keeping well out of this, yet they are 50% involved and should be involved financially. And then we come down to a report on the 30th of October 2023, where in fact matters were drawn to the attention that there might be problems with the structure, but nothing happened, and that is regrettable. We then come to the options, and under 4.43, references there, it will take another 5 months, assuming everything went swimmingly well from now on. Well, 212 days gone so far. This has not been the City Council's finest hour. The Churchillian spirit of action this day has been somewhat lacking, and that is a regrettable thing. I've mentioned that there's no reference here to the cycle route. The public purse is pumping hundreds of thousands of pounds into cycle routes where most people don't want them and they're seldom used. This is a well-established cycle route and has been for years, decades, and a public footpath, and it doesn't even get a bloody mention. I mean, what's going on there? No reference here to all the events on Lower Castle Park in Kings Meadow. There's no reference in there to all that inconvenience that's gone into there. There's no reference to the fact that this was a mill in Saxon times. It predates the Norman castle. This is part of our heritage, part of our history. It doesn't get a mention at all. It says celebrating our heritage and culture. Not much of it in there. Can I just also refer you to Anglian Water, Ardley Reservoir Committee? The report to you says their preferred choice was a rebuild. I've got a copy of the letter that they sent to the council. It doesn't say that's their preferred choice. Ardley Reservoir Committee is in agreement that the weir should be replaced. Not a preferred choice. A preferred choice, if I can use the phrase, is watering down a bit. So that letter, you ought to get a copy, the full copy. I've only got an extract. Letter in April, May to the council from the Anglian Water, Ardley Reservoir Committee. Not a preferred choice, it's an agreement. And the reason for that is the impact on the water flows and quality. Water drunk by the people of Colchester is extracted further downriver to the Ardley Reservoir. And the quality of that water, the danger is it's being impacted. And that is something that should be serious, really. You're going to hear shortly, I believe, from Colchester Canoe Club. Hundreds of thousands of pounds of public money has been spent on the Northern Sports Park and what have you. Here we have an established club going for more than 30 years. And unless that weir is reinstated, the club goes. one of the most successful water sports clubs in the whole of the east of England. This is one of the things could happen. And it's just, the Residents Association, North Residents Association, Riverside and Riverside Place, all the residents want the weir reinstated. The people who live in the neighbourhood want it reinstated. And I don't think it's asking too much. And so finally, I've mentioned the fact that you have all the information, we haven't. Huge metal barriers have gone up, preventing people from using a pedestrian path, public footpath, cycle path being used for donkey's years. So how much that costs and who paid for it? And I end, Chairman, just saying I'm very disappointed with Colchester City Council. I had hoped that we'd had this sorted out. Today is day 212, the 10th of December. How will we commemorate or celebrate the first anniversary of this loss of public footpath and cycleway? Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Bob. I'm not going to comment too much on what you've said because we're going to have a lively discussion later on. But what I would say is I'm in complete agreement with you. I lament the loss of the access, which is causing inconvenience at the moment, and we do need to get this resolved. I'm not going to say much more than that right now. The only positive take on this, I'll chuck in the mix right now though, because obviously you've come here quite critical of the current situation, is I am grateful that this authority has consulted widely. I think that's a really good thing, because it always struck me that the decision either way on what to do there has an impact. And it's a bit like saying, look, I want to plant loads of trees, and you plant them on a field, and then suddenly kids can't play football anymore. So it has an unintended consequences. So I think consulting widely was the right thing to do. And I hope that you're happy with the list of consultees.
Chairman, I obviously agree with that. What I should have said is that we've already lost 4 trees falling into the lower water level. And the riverside cottages, which are picturesque, are only picturesque when there's water in the river, not when it's a ditch.
Thank you, Sir Bob. Let's move on. I don't think we have any other members of the public to say anything tonight. I'm looking around. We don't. Right. Item 7, decisions taken under special urgency provisions. There were none. Item 8, cabinet or portfolio holder decisions called in for review. We have none tonight. Items requested by members of the panel and other members. I'm unaware of any, and I don't have any myself. So, in which case, we'll move on to item 10, which is a portfolio holder briefing, which is Councillor Martin Goss, I believe. I hope you've had a nice break after a very busy period in your life. Welcome. And this is obviously one of those perennial presentations, but it doesn't need to be a presentation, because I know that you're very, very on top of your brief as someone that's been on it for quite a while. So you do not need to kill us by PowerPoint, but you can try if you want. Over to you.
You won't be getting any PowerPoint. We did this a year ago, and what's within the portfolio is pretty much the same with some changes, because I've picked up some of the operational parts of sport and leisure, which is still quite new. But just to recap, some of you are still on this panel from last year, so we'll remember a lot of this, and hopefully we won't get the same line of questioning that we struggled with a bit last year. We look after public conveniences. One set of public conveniences did go across the Lion Walk shopping centre, which has now been refurbished, which I think has been very successful. We also, of course, have street cleansing operations, which covers the entirety of the city and the borough map of Colchester, which includes some weekend working. We also, of course, have road sweeping, which goes on as well across the city. And we also partner with Keep Britain Tidy, where we ended up getting 50k for a van to include towing one of the Karchers. We hosted the Knife Angel in October 23. And we've also carried out various days of action across the city as well, which have been quite successful. And we have currently over 700 litter warriors that work across the city as volunteers at various times of the week and weekend, picking up litter, including me, of course. KPIs, we have a KPI for fly tipping, which is 2,262 for the years 23-24, and we are green because we've only had 1,962 reported. There has not been a huge upturn in garden waste being dumped as well, which I'm sure will be one of the questions. It is pretty stable in terms of year on year, which is good, and therefore we're not finding vast amounts of garden waste dumped by bins or thrown in bushes, etc. There's the odd incident, but very tiny, which is exactly what other councils found when we were researching the garden waste. There is the new waste strategy that's currently being reviewed at the moment by the public. That was sent out, and as of yesterday, over 2,000 people had responded to the questionnaire. The questionnaire itself, personally, I found it a bit clunky, but it's there for people to respond to, and we will obviously then assess how we go forwards with the new waste strategy. The new waste strategy is running in conjunction with the Essex Waste Partnership, because they're looking to review that strategy across Essex on what they do with waste, and every other borough and city council is engaged in that as well, on how we will collect and support that strategy going forwards. In terms of recycling rates, it is actually very, very good news, because across Essex we're third. So the highest is 58.7%, which is Rochford, and then we're third with 53.5%, which is very good. So in deep history, around about 2016, we were at about 42%. So we were languishing, I think, second from bottom, only with tendering being worse than we are. And in fact, even with the changes tendering have done, they're still languishing at 38.6%. And Brentwood is actually bottom of the table. So we're doing quite well. When you then compare recycling to other authorities across the UK who have a similar mixed system like we do, we're again third. West Oxfordshire have 56.8%. Mid Devon is then second at 55.4%, and we're there at 53.5%. So it does show that our system works, but the new waste strategy is looking more towards wheeled bins, which will bring delight for some and horror for others. But that's the strategy that we've currently got. That strategy was a cross-party piece of work that was undertaken by the Environment Panel. So that is now what's being consulted on. So that is what will go forwards, most likely with more element of wheeled bins across the delivery. Residual waste per household, the annual target is 354 kilograms per household, and we're currently putting in the ground 321 kilograms per household, so that's below target, which is good, which means it's green. In terms of household waste reused, recycled and composted, the annual target is 53%, and we've achieved 54%. So we are actually green. So the KPIs are generally very, very good. We're also dealing with playgrounds in the portfolio, and some good news is that we've actually invested in the portfolio of playgrounds. We've got over 73 playgrounds that we look after, and we have delivered improvements in Pondfield, Greenstead Slopes, John Mace, Mill Road, Highwoods Country Park, Gurdon Road, Gavin Way, School Road, Victoria Esplanade down at Mersey, and we've got works commencing at Westlands Country Park, Tilehouse Farm, Swift Avenue and Garrison Gym as well. I've already mentioned about the waste strategy, which we can always touch on, and one of the questions was around litter bins. Well, there are 1,900 litter bins, including dog waste bins in Colchester. We have not removed them. There is a desire by officers to remove 25% of them. There isn't a desire by the portfolio holder to do that, because I quite like litter bins. Probably 1,800 of them are all in Mile End anyway. I'm joking. But we do have a high lot in Mile End, as in the city centre, and then they're dispersed across other wards. One of the things I have sanctioned, though, is the removal of dog waste bins and the provision of replacing them or ensuring that there is a litter bin in place of it, because it gives more storage, and it's also one bin to change, not 2 or 3. So that is a programme of work we have been doing, where a dog bin becomes end of life and it gets replaced by a litter bin. Or if there is a dog bin and a litter bin next door to each other, you remove the dog bin, because operationally it makes it slightly quicker. So that is one thing I have sanctioned at this stage, and that is an ongoing piece of work.
Jump in on that one, just so, and do folks know, because I don't have a dog, but do folks with dogs know that they can put dog poo in those bins? Because historically you used to get signs saying don't put dog poo in them. So have you managed that one?
Yeah, so we definitely have got signage on them saying that you can put them in, and it has been like that for some years because it all goes to the same place. So I'm happy that education on that is working. So, you know, you can put everything in those bins, which is absolutely fine. So I think that's a whistle-stop tour. Obviously, car parking sits under me as well, and we've dealt with some of the antisocial behaviour around the car parks, but that's the portfolio. I'm happy to take questions, because you really don't need a line-by-line trot through of what I do.
Thank you very much. I imagine there will be lots of questions. I'll take the chair's prerogative and do one really easy one for you then, and then we'll go around the table. So you mentioned car parking at the end, and I was sat in a family cafe in Colchester on Sunday, and I overheard a gentleman say to his presumably other half, I can't get the app to work, I'm trying to extend my stay. I don't know whether the app had a problem or not, doesn't really matter. But what does matter to me is that I still personally think that when you guess how long you're going to be somewhere, you try and get out within that 2-3 hour slot. Whereas if you bump into a friend and have an extra coffee, shall we say, you might decide to stay longer. And it just strikes me that there are some places around here, I've done them lots, where you just simply type your reg in at the end and you just pay at the end. I just wondered if you were alive to that camera recognition tech. I know it's infrastructure, but whether you're happy with what we've got right now, or whether you're open-minded to that in the long run.
Well, the MI Permit or My Permit app is, of course, used by many, many councils. So it is a generic app. It's not Colchester specific. And therefore, what we're using and how we're operating is in line with how many other councils across the UK are also operating. That said, I know Richard Walker is looking at other technology and other approaches following feedback. And therefore, as we upgrade machines and technology, then that feedback can certainly be fed in, and I know that he's doing a piece of work to look at that as part of the car parking strategy that we're always updating. And I don't disagree, but I think once people get used to using an app and it's easy enough to extend, they can do it from the luxury of their coffee and add an extra couple of hours in. So it's not insurmountable that it's quite easy to do, but you know, like all these things, we do review it. But as I say, we're not out of kilter with other towns and cities that use the same technology.
Okay, thank you for being open-minded to it. I was just thinking about my mum today, because she got on the park and ride because she didn't want to use an app. But the park and ride worked for her, so it's fine. Okay, Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. Councillor Goss, I don't go into town very often, but I don't think I've seen these in town. Is there much appetite for recycling bins in the city centre?
They have been in the city centre, and if you take a trip out from the high street or from the town hall and you turn left, you'll find a swathe of them just literally down by the breeze block wall near where Bill's is. You'll find them there, and we spent a significant amount of money some years ago putting them in, so they are there.
Councillor Smalls.
I'm sorry, with the garden waste subscription, so currently we're in a situation where if you want to join partway through the year, and obviously this is the first year, so some people who didn't join are now thinking, well, yeah, I do want to join, but they're having to pay the same price for part of the year. So I'm wondering if in future it could be reviewed so it can be more of a rolling subscription that you can sort of, when you pay, you then get a year from that date, or even a monthly. I know there'd be reasons, technical reasons for it, but I'd be more interested if you could just get a whole year from the date you pay.
It's not going to happen. Being straight to the point, because we went through this scrutiny when we obviously looked at the approach, and we obviously consulted with many other councils who have got great expertise in it and how they operate, you know, whether it's monthly payment, direct debit, etc., etc. One of the things we did say we would do is we would look at promotions part year to try and deal with that, because I do agree that if you're 5 months from the subscription ending because you suddenly decide to subscribe in September for some reason, you know, it happens, then I do agree that isn't, in my view, particularly fair. So I do agree, and there are supposed to be kind of part year promotions that should be coming through. In terms of the reason that we have the subscription running to the same period is purely operational and financial for very, very good reasons. We've discussed at length at this panel, so I'm not going to go through those again. You can check back at the old meetings, but we went through this. We spent a whole evening going through this, and I'd rather not spend a whole evening going through it again. We can if you like, but there's other things on the agenda of high importance. But in terms of part year, if everyone is subscribed, they'll all be asked to renew at the same time, which in effect means next year they should all get a year if they choose to stay part of the scheme, because it makes sense. Why wouldn't you? So, and at the outset of the scheme, we did do 15 months for the price of 12, so people could subscribe early and be early adopters, which is always good. And I think I was the 50th wheelie bin in Colchester, so I was an early adopter.
Councillor Smalls, are you happy?
Well, it would be nice if people could join part way through, but I understand the reasons.
Okay, I see Councillor Rowe, and then I see Martin. Yeah.
Councillor Goss, just on that point of why people can't join through the year, can you remind us what the technical reason is as to why they can't join through the year, please?
I think you misunderstand. They can join any part of the year. It's just they pay the full year subscription.
Fine. Why they can't join through the year and they can't pay for just the part that they're using? Because obviously it's a simple calculation that we could work out. So why can't we just, as Councillor Smalls says, what's the technical reason why we can't do what Councillor Smalls is asking for?
You were on this panel when we debated this at length, and we said this is the product, and that is how it's been rolled out. So, as I've said, we will do promotions potentially, but this is the product, and this is what was rolled out, and this is what was scrutinised. So that is what was delivered.
So it's not a technical reason, it's simply your decision that you're making people pay. That's the reason, yeah?
So without you trying to start politicising this panel, no one person has the authority to make that decision. It's a cabinet decision. It was scrutinised and it went to cabinet. No one person has that authority to make that decision. No one person. So let's just be really clear on that.
Okay, Councillor Parsons.
Can I take you to the messy subject of dog poo, which, after potholes, is a very live issue in, I'm sure, everybody's ward who's here. You talked about removing dog poo bins when they're next to a general waste bin. Can I ask you if that is a policy where there's a compactor bin, as we've got quite a number on West Mersey now, and are there any technical problems with putting dog poo in a compactor bin?
I wouldn't plan to do that in compactor bins because the waste stays there far longer. So compactor bins I would see would be outside of scope of that at this moment in time. And given that we've got very few of them at this moment in time, I think I saw a couple in Dedham when I was visiting on Sunday. But I wouldn't expect that to happen because I think the compactor bins are there for a reason. To stop the amount of waste having to be changed so often. So no, I wouldn't see that. I mean, there's nothing stopping people putting dog poo in, but I wouldn't see us doing that at this stage.
That felt like a very comforting answer, didn't it?
Can I ask another
You
question?
can.
On the compactor bins, so you mentioned Dedham, popular spot for tourists in the summer, as is West Mersey, where the town council has worked with the Colchester in having those installed. Obviously, there is a much greater demand for them at some times of the year. Are they being emptied more regularly at those times of year? And if not, could they be?
So at Mersey, I think we took out 14 litter bins from memory or something equivalent to that amount to put the compactor bins in to reduce the amount of times that we had to go down, visit and change. The compactor bins will be changed as and when they need to be, and the technology there is to alert, as I understand it, so that we would know that they need changing. That was the whole point, because the compactor bins are not cheap. But the business case is, if you're visiting less, particularly if you're travelling from Shrubend to Mersey, which is a 20-mile round trip, from an environmental impact point of view, a fuel point of view, and also from a time and cost point of view of staff, they are more effective. But they are able to take a lot more waste and compact it for those very reasons, and alert when they need to be changed. So we would only visit when they needed to be changed. That's the whole idea of the technology. So that's the business case.
Okay, all right. One or two more for me then. You've got £1 million in savings to be made. Are you confident that's going to happen?
Well, it's for the officers to deliver. So yes, we will, and that will be through various options, including the waste strategy. So that's what we're planning to do. And I think we've had a pretty good reputation at hitting targets in my area generally. So I will make sure that we drive those through appropriately.
Okay, and just because he's not here tonight and he did have quite a number of things to say, can we give Mr. Chilvers some reassurance that despite potential cuts, housekeeping is still going to be a priority for you? And I'm going to let you off for the weeds because it is very wet and very hot all the time at the moment. That makes it hard, but general housekeeping, it's more than just overgrown weeds, isn't it? And can you give Mr. Chilvers and indeed us some assurance that this is a priority for you?
So I'm going to give you quite a long answer on this because it's something I feel quite passionate about at the moment. As the greening team will know, let's separate out who's responsible for what. So weeds in the road, that is Essex County Council. So if you see weeds growing out the gutters of the road, that is Essex County Council, who drive round, or the Ringway Jacobs have people that drive round on the back of buggies spraying glyphosate weed killer. So they use glyphosate weed killer. One of the things, and I will be writing to Tom Cunningham about, because I think it's utterly
Councillor Tom Cunningham.
Yes, County Councillor Tom Cunningham. Because one of the things I've witnessed is that in the rain, and there's been a lot of rain, they continue to spray weed killer. So it's ineffective because it just gets washed away, which means the weeds get worse. And one of the things we're trying to do is liaise with Essex to go out and road sweep the weeds once they've died, because hooking them out the road with the road sweeper, which have nylon brushes on, which cost more money, but they're specialist at getting the weeds out. But if the weeds don't die, they won't go in the road sweeper. It's as simple as that. So there is some collaborative working, but it would help if the weeds actually got killed in the first place. I'm not going to comment on glyphosate because we've stopped using it. It has had a detrimental effect though. And a good example is on playgrounds where nettles and weeds now grow up because we don't use glyphosate weed killer. We do use weed killer, but it's non-glyphosate. It's not as strong, but it has an effect. So we had to close one of the playgrounds in St John's recently because of the nettle growth, but we've dealt with it and trimmed it out, but it costs money to do that. So I have asked officers to look at the impact that has on cost by not using glyphosate weed killer, because what we're using is not as effective. It's more environmentally friendly and doesn't cause cancer if you obviously follow the science. And that's why we stopped using it, but it then has an impact on the environment and playgrounds. So we are doing a piece of work on that. In terms of ID Verdi, they've really struggled this year. We do monthly grass cuts. We do them April to October. And the inclement weather of sun and rain, like the Madness song, is not helping. And then they struggle to keep up, etc., etc. We also cut the amount of, pardon the pun, we also cut the amount of border visits that we do because we only do them twice a year on behalf of Essex County Council. Now, we're actually speaking to Essex County Council at the moment because they pay us, I think, 60 grand a year or something like that, some derisory figure to do the whole of Colchester for all their land, 60 grand, seriously taking the mickey. And we, for years, have topped it up by hundreds of thousands of pounds. And therefore, that's why we had to go from 14 cuts a year down to 6, or 8 cuts on the parks and open areas that we look after, because we're subsidising Essex County Council. So we're talking to them about coughing up more money, or ultimately we might give all the land back to them and say, your problem, you know, and they'll cut it twice a year probably, if that. So, you know, those are the sorts of conversations we have to have, because this council is subsidising Essex. So something to just be aware of. We are changing the way we do some of the border maintenance because I'm not satisfied with what we're doing. So we are changing the regime on that in the approach. What we used to do is visit them 4 times a year, and we would literally be hand pulling weeds out. Now we strim them. Well, they grow straight back and they look dreadful. So we are looking at changing the way we do that. But ultimately, Essex should be paying more money because we're subsidising those visits. So I just want people to be absolutely abundantly clear that we are still subsidising the greening work that we're not actually legally responsible for. But I do feel passionate about trying to deliver the best service we can.
And Mr. Chilvers made a very specific reference to no mow May and Virgin.
Yep.
I think he referenced that is it Wivenhoe? I have to say I don't go there as often as I used to, but Wivenhoe has made some good examples of educating people. This is why we've left this area here. Are you on that? Because obviously there are parish councils that own land assets as well, so it gets complicated if you take into the whole borough.
So on our website there is a list of the areas that we leave and will only cut annually. Forget no mow May, we're talking about rewilding. In terms of no mow May, it's a bit of a myth actually. So last year we did actually leave the verges on purpose through May, and I made the decision this year operationally not to do that. And the reason I made that is because it makes them even harder to cut. Because the longer they get and the more wild they get, it just gets worse and messier to cut. So I said the only areas we won't cut are those designated as rewilding areas. Everywhere else gets cut in May. So no mow May is a myth. Unfortunately, it looks like we haven't cut them because they've just gone literally wild because of the weather. Which hasn't helped. If you go back 2 or 3 years ago, we only actually did do 6 cuts because when we were still contracted to do 14, purely because everything was dead. It was napalmed. So, you know, the grass and everything was just dead and it was not worth cutting. So it just depends on what type of summer and year you have. And we're just having a bad year of weather, which doesn't help. But obviously we're reviewing it and dealing with it and holding ID Verdi to account, and I have asked to see them shortly to give them some feedback on my observations, particularly when they don't litter pick and they mow everything up and just leave it, which really does wind me up.
Okay, well, I'm very satisfied that you've tackled some of Mr. Chilvers' specific concerns there. I'm pleased we did that one. Looking around the room, are there any other questions? Councillor Scordis, good to hear from you.
And slightly linking to what Councillor Chilvers has raised, do we know the amount of operational road sweepers we have and how much they cover in a day?
So there is a weekly email that I get which lists all the vehicles that are on and off the road and what areas have been covered and what the schedule is for next week. So the road sweeper reliability is a lot better than it was because we've taken some steps with Riverside, our contractor who service them, to ensure they've got more spare parts. So the majority of road sweepers are on the road the majority of the time. So the schedule is on the website, which gives you a rough indication as to what should be getting swept, and we are sticking to that quite well now. So I think the regime is better than it ever has been, but the road sweepers will be coming end of life. We are looking at the next generation of road sweepers, and we will then be procuring or leasing the next lot and getting rid of what we've got, and ensuring that reliability is one of the high procurement references, so that we get the best in class that we can.
Okay, well, I think we are going to thank Councillor Goss for giving up his time tonight, and I'm happy to conclude at this point. I think we have satisfaction. Thank you very much, Councillor Goss. Enjoy the rest of your evening, or do stay. You're most welcome. Okay, we're now coming to item 11. We're doing good on time. We've got Councillor Jay here, I believe, the portfolio lead, to introduce this item to us.
I have, yes. So I appreciate there's other items of value and importance, but I think it is important that we recognise the performance of the council in terms of its key performance indicators and the strategic plan, delivery plan. What we have in front of us, and hopefully you've looked at, are the KPI actuals and targets and some excellent detailed narrative. I am aware we're missing the benchmarking that we had last year. This was missing due to a resource issue, but it is being followed up because I think it's useful for us to have, both in terms of context, placing us against others, and perspective on both the red and the green items. Councillor Goss has referred to some of the waste statistics and our comparatives. I think we could usefully look at those on others. I'm going to run through some of the highlights and lowlights, and then happy to answer any questions. So we have 26 performance indicators under the 5 strategic themes. The overall position, your report says 17, it's actually 18 that have achieved green and 6 that have not met the targets. There's been an adjustment to one of the housing indicators, the customer satisfaction, where they feel, in light of performance over the last 3 to 4 months, that its status is probably better green than red. Of these 17 KPIs that have achieved green, it's worth noting some have actually been exceeded, and so housing benefits and the local council tax team, residents are receiving benefits well above average, well above target. So I think we need to offer our congratulations for the teams for doing these, particularly as they're working under quite tough conditions. Looking at particular, I'll look at a couple of the greens. I've got some extra information. Looking page 25, the HRA rent collected, I think if people remember at half year, this was off target because of rents, people receiving universal tax credit in arrears. That's now adjusted, so we're back into green. Leisure centre income is above target, which is good to see. There's been some very focused targeting. I was talking to the comms and marketing team yesterday, and there's been some very successful quick bursts on Facebook reminding people of gym memberships, that type of thing, and so they've achieved target on income, which is good to see. Page 26, again, the museum's income is up. Bereavement services is down. It's down about 13% on target. I've looked at some of the data in detail. The actual rolling 12-month figures year to date are what we would have had prior to COVID, so prior to 2020. What we didn't know is at what point those figures were going to drop off, and the drop off has happened this year, but prices have gone up in October, and there's some soft selling products that are going onto the website. We've got a new website, and hopefully we've got a good target going forward into the year. I don't think there's any particular issues with that, just that we were slightly off target. Garden waste, Martin's already stolen my thunder on those. Just a couple of extra statistics that I had is that we have 33.13% of households in the first quarter that have accepted the brown waste collection. We're actually, as Martin was saying, the fly tipping incidents are actually identical the first quarter of this year compared to the first quarter of last year, and that the kilogram wastage is maintained. They think, having looked at other areas, I think Peterborough in particular, it tends to be the heavy duty users that have gone for the garden subscription, so actually the recycling is being maintained even though you've got fewer households partaking. So that's obviously good to see. And the recycling, we're in the top 10%, I think, in the country in terms of our waste target. A couple of reds there that I'm going to hold my hands up to and say I don't have background on, but it seems to make sense to me that trees planted and the improving biodiversity is mainly because the money hasn't been spent in those areas. I will look into that unless anybody's got any particular concerns. Probably the ones that we need to focus, I'll look at some of the greens first of all. We've talked about the time to process, housing benefit, the disabled facilities grant that I think was raised last year. There's been an improvement on spend there. So the only real red flags are the housing ones. Looking at those, I think the number of households in temporary accommodation, there's obviously been intense pressure on the housing teams. We've had 975 cases presented to us this year in terms of homelessness. There were 323 households as at the end of March that are all waiting for accommodation, 86 in bed and breakfast. 468 out of the total of 2,157, I think, are looking for 3 bedrooms plus, which is obviously in short supply. There's no getting round that. That's not going to get any better over the next year or so. But I think, having spoken to the portfolio holder and to Philip Sullivan, they are working very hard to alleviate the issues as far as they can. The average time to re-let council homes in the last 4 months, the target has been reached and they've improved from 31-day to a 28-day turnaround. They've changed the contractor involved. They're using more in-house repairs and they've introduced a sort of pre-tenancy exit inspection, which is delivering some benefits. So they're catching the problems before tenants move out. And repairs completed within target timescale again is showing red at the moment, but there has been an improvement from 74% to 83% between March 23 and March 24, and it's acknowledged to be a priority area in 24-25 for the housing team. Moving on to the strategic plan, delivery plan, this one is, there's less, this is more about the narrative, but actually the KPIs are embedded within this. So having had a quick review, I think I'm happy with the content of these. I know the one of the ambers, which is the climate emergency action plan, is coming back to review in scrutiny. So presumably that you'll pick any concerns up at that point. Delivering modern services for a modern city is obviously ongoing work and it's subject to review by Cabinet, the senior leadership team, the transformation board. So there's a lot of people working on this, pushing it through. I think that's really it. So if anybody's got any particular questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you for that comprehensive introduction. There will be a number of questions. I'm going to take one really easy one to start with though for you. First of all, to say there is a lot of green on here, and that's to be commended. It's been, I still think, a very difficult time post-COVID and the lockdowns of 2 years that we've had and all the impact that's had on housing and mental health, which is still with us. So that does go some way to explain some of the context. On the trees, now I don't know anything about trees, but I really like trees. And I think you alluded to the fact that you weren't necessarily across that specific detail, and I don't blame you. I was going to be helpful to the administration and explain that I understand that where there was good intent to plant some trees, I think some archaeological activities were incurred, which meant that it wasn't really appropriate or easy to plant said trees. But then it did get me thinking, again, I'm not an expert on trees at all, but I don't really know what 2,000 trees means, that aspiration. I don't really get it. What I do get is that compared to Europe, our overall tree coverage as a nation is something like 30% lower, and that's bad. So we need to increase tree coverage as a nation. I mean, there's historic reasons why that is the way that it is, but we know, don't we, that trees are great to capture carbon, great for wildlife, great for our own mental health, and etc. So we know trees are good, but Colchester's boundary, the borough, is defined, unless we have plans to incur into Suffolk in the north and take more land. We've got a defined space. So what within that space as a percentage is trees now, and where do we want to get to? I mean, maybe the methodology would be more useful in that presentation. Is just some random feedback that I've just come up with. So I'd be grateful if those that are watching this and those that can influence this, and I'm looking at the leader, might take that back, because I just don't know what 2,000 means. And you can plant 2,000 trees, but only 10 survive. So, you know, what does that mean? And what type of trees? You know, might be trees that are good for the squirrels, but not so good for another type of animal. I don't know. So the red for me, I'm quite relaxed about it, because I know some of the context around the archaeology. But where it says that also limited budget was available to plant new trees, I thought the Woodland Trust will basically give you trees. I mean, they did an amazing job up in Fordham. I don't know if an officer who put those words in there might wish to explore whether or not it is a budgetary reason why those trees aren't being planted. I don't know. Anyway, I'll leave it with the leader. I've said my piece. I wasn't being contentious. I just wanted to get off my chest. I saw a number of hands go up. I think Councillor Small's first.
I've got a couple of things. The first should be quite simple. It's just in the reporting. So for Leisure World, museums and bereavement, the figure that's down there is income. Is that like a gross figure? Because it would be more useful we need to know the net figure after expenses, what the actual profit is. So that's my first
this
question.
is a KPI target that's been set specifically for income, not about performance. Which comes into the sort of budget, and some of it is because of the way the overheads are allocated across sports and leisure, and so this is a very specific income figure.
I still don't understand why you'd just have income, because you can have an increase in income
And increasing costs,
and a
so
decrease,
the performance.
and,
No, I
and the
absolutely
profit
agree.
could go down.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't make sense. Because I mean that's what I was reading as gross, but I thought that doesn't make sense. But anyway. The next thing, I suppose that working now. Yeah. So with the when I was on this panel last year, I was really concerned about the voids. So it's good that action's been taken, and it looks like you've got a new contractor. But 28 days is still a hell of a long time for an empty property. So, I mean, in a worst-case scenario, which you might need a new bathroom and kitchen and plumbers in, as well as other tradespeople, 28 days is still a really long time. If you're looking at a situation which would be normal, where you need a deep clean and decorating, that should be done in less than 7 days. So what I'm assuming is the delay is because the contractors have got delays in sourcing the tradespeople. In that case, are we limited to just using one contractor? Can we have a range of contractors? Can we have individual tradespeople on our books, particularly in cases where it's a deep clean and a decorate? And I've noticed that we seem to have an in-house team for the repairs. So that feeds back to, can't we have just a list of people on our books, different contractors, to get these things done? Because we're in a horrendous situation with homelessness, and it's saying that we are now we don't know what the target is for the repairs team. So there's more satisfaction with the Colchester Borough Homes repairs team than when it's outsourced, but we don't actually know what the target is. So it says we're meeting 90% or 82.62. But what is that target in terms of time? That's on page 36.
Page 36. I was given that figure. I need to go back. I can come back on that. In terms of it's not just about having the people available. It's about sourcing the bits that they need for the repairs and the cost of repairs. It's all had an impact. All I can say is, from the information I've had, is that they're working very hard, and the portfolio holders are focused on this. But I'm happy to take anything back in terms of propositions.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that people are working hard, but I just think we need more information about this, because if they're just using one contractor, it's just 28 days is just way too long, as I say, with an empty property.
Councillor Smalls, do you mind if I jump in at that point as well?
If it's just this,
It's
if
just,
it's a turnaround point.
It's just on that turnaround point. Last year when we discussed this, I think we had a discussion with the leader of the council with regards to some regulations around, I can't remember, I think the example at the time was used was around, if a tap was broken, for example, then somebody might not be able to move in because the quality of the home would be considered not up to scratch for people to move in, and that the reasons, if I remember correctly, was given as to why the 28-day turnaround was the time that we were looking at. It might be a bit of a question for the leader here, but I do remember that we said that you would try to investigate that and see if we could look to see what regulations we needed to, either look to amend or look to lobby other areas of government to try to change it. And here we go. I'll hand over to the leader.
That'll teach me to come up before the end of the question, won't it? Well, I just want to pick up the point. You're absolutely right in your recall, and it's something that you'll be very well aware of this, Faye, that the pressures that the housing sector is under and all housing providers are under, including Colchester Borough Homes, is not just supplies and contractors and how fast you can get things done, how fast you can do the admin and the paperwork. It's the rising expectations of people and the fact that we have new regulation on the back of Grenfell and other pressures, mould, dampness and impacts on health. And we have, frankly, and it's not a bad thing necessarily, we have more aware tenants of our properties. And so you might recall, have seen a number of maladministration cases. When you look at them, they're real for that individual. They're given prominence because that's what the regulator requires. They come to cabinet. We've got one coming tomorrow, but they are around relatively small issues in the grand scheme of things. But they have, I'm going to say they could have a chilling effect. They certainly are going to make for an acute look at the balance between getting things to a standard and the alternative, which is get people who are homeless or in need of a home into a home. So I think we're not at the end yet, the process of squeezing that time, so that the ideas you've raised and the issue being discussed is absolutely right, and we'll take that away. Philip Sullivan is all over that, as is the portfolio holder, but we just need to bear it in mind, and you're spot on in your recollection.
No, I mean, I wouldn't ever want standards lowered. I'm more interested in if the methods of getting it done, and if, back to the question of if we can only have one contractor, because when you read this, it looks like we've swapped one contractor out for another, or if we can have a range of contractors on the books, so that if one company can't do it, and even, I don't know if it's possible to have individuals.
Let us take that away, but I know that there's been a really thoughtful review around that balance and the quality of service, and it's going in a better direction. Could I just, Chair, with your permission, just go back to the earlier point around the earlier item when we're talking about income, and that being the only factor. That is the target that was set by consultation with the committee. But it's absolutely, the point is taken, and elsewhere we will be seeing this. So fit for the future as the change programme that's reflected in our budget, against which we will be reporting and which there will be review and scrutiny, will show the progress we're making, when it has to be the balance we'd all recognise. How are your costs, both hidden background costs of overheads, your frontline costs, and your pursuit of profit, as well as your income and loss. So that whole equation is obviously one we expect our commercial arms to be bearing in mind all of the time, with one social factor. Let's bear that in mind, which is, of course, we're here for exercise, health and well-being. We've got a social responsibility too. We don't want to be not losing any money but providing more service, so there's a balance there too. But the point's taken, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Smalls, are you happy? Okay, I see Councillor Scordis, Councillor Rowe and Councillor Parsons. Councillor Scordis.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to speak on the voids as well. I mean, we're clearly doing better, but it would be good to see what the comparisons are with other social landlords and other councils. But I should say, I've seen some housing associations literally move people in without inspecting them, and they've ended up in absolute disaster zones. So at least we're not getting there to that level. On the trees issue, I am slightly more concerned. It feels to me that if one spot wasn't suitable, we must have had other spots. There's a lot of other spots in Colchester. And if we're only reaching 11% of our target, it's pretty embarrassing. 75% is embarrassing. This is pretty shambolic. And what annoys me more is that the previous years we've done it, trees have struggled to survive because we've had big heat waves. This year, we've had the wettest winter on record, where these trees may have had a chance to survive. So we've missed an opportunity there. So that is really disappointing. And clearly on the biodiversity one, we're just not there yet. So I don't know why we didn't have a plan in place, because we've been talking about this for years and we're not there. So that is disappointing. Other than that, as you said, Chair, I mean, other things we are performing really well, but there's clearly some weaknesses where we should be doing a lot better. These aren't areas we should be failing, and I don't think we've failed before, so that is slightly disappointing, but this is why we have these meetings, so we can learn and actually get this right.
And I would say I think the benchmarking will help with that, because obviously in comparison, when we looked at it before, we're not the worst, we're not the best. So we need to bear in mind that we're working within a really tough environment, but I'm happy to get some clarity on the process, because I think that's worth looking at.
Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, but first of all, just on the point of the sort of unoccupied homes, do we know how many on average that we have that are unoccupied? Do we keep that stat anywhere?
Unoccupied homes, I don't know, but I
couldn't find it. Okay, thank you. That's fine. I couldn't find it in there. I think that would be quite useful to have, because then we can sort of. I also noticed that we've increased rent by 7% in 23-24, which is the max amount in accordance with the rent cap set by central government. I don't quite understand exactly how this works. So can you explain to me how, residents in housing, in CBH housing, they face a cost of living crisis. How are we expecting them to afford an increase of 7%? We're told, that food bank usage is at an all-time high. The inflation's through the roof. People don't have the ability to, sort of deal with shocks to their finances. And then we're increasing rent by 7% on some of the most, possibly the most vulnerable people in society. How are we expecting them to pay that?
They are. If you look at the KPI on rent collection, then that is high. So people are paying the rents. They're not missing out on paying the rents. I mean, other things are going up proportionally. So the money they're getting in universal tax credit is going up by the same amount. We have to raise our rents in order to pay our bills. Otherwise, we'd be making a loss as well.
So we're not expecting the individuals to pay for it. We're taking it out of the money they get from central government. Is that correct?
I think I'd have to get clarity on that, but that was my understanding.
Well, I think what we're saying is we can give you more information that's helpful to the committee, but this has been gone through elsewhere by Philip Sullivan and Colchester Borough Homes, but there is a relationship we understand between cost and income. The national rent cap is applied by all housing associations and providers. I think it's worth us saying that, of course, what we're doing with providing a home for people and at affordable or social rent, we are rightly doing all we can to help people have a home. So you have to have a context for this kind of conversation, but if it's helpful to see the relationship, we can provide you that, but it's linked to housing benefit, it's linked to those who need help getting help, but that's a very individual picture. And there will be people doing well who happen to be living in social and affordable housing. So there's a whole wider conversation, but our tenants we have to approach in a rounded kind of way. We have to ensure, as described by Alison, we have to ensure that we're viable. And that's another conversation we will be having about the housing revenue account, which is the sum of all incomes, all expend, and which is challenged, as has been recognised in the last scrutiny conversation we had. So If you need more information, no doubt we can get it for you.
Okay, fine, thank you. I mean, the sort of answers it, I suppose, I sort of get from the vagrancy of the answer that, you know, where the money's coming from. I suppose it would be useful to understand, you know, sort of, I think we've gone through this in previous meetings, how many people are, you know, are having increases in, you know, sort of benefit payments, etc., to pay for that, as you say, probably for another day.
I'm just going to say it's not. Just going to say that's not the subject I thought of the item. That's a different matter taken at a different time, but we can provide a background paper to the committee if it requires it. But that wasn't the item. The item was how are we doing on KPI performance, and the answer is as described, well.
Fair enough. Okay. I suppose the second point, well, so the third point is around the council has a strategy to carry a minimum level of reserves. I noticed in the document that we point out that the minimum level of reserves has been established as £3 million. However, we're already below that minimum after adopting it in March. Now, I do accept that that you say in the document that we also have funds elsewhere that you could transfer into the central account in order to make up that 3 million. However, it does seem a bit odd that we would put in a minimum amount in March and then already break it in July. So just wondering, you know, sort of, I don't know, do we need a KPI around that, for example? And is the council that's running so close to their reserves, are we taking a bit of a risk, sort of borrowing £205 million for the HRA account to purchase these houses that we are looking into?
Well, a couple of responses. So you're right, I'd prefer to see the recommended level kept all the time, but this is just a moment in time. There's no suggestion, in fact it's the other way around. It's very clear that we have in the sum of our reserves what we require to be at or beyond that figure. I am as impatient as anybody else, perhaps more so, to see us come to the end. And there's lots of work for our finance team to get to the point, to the end of their review, very thorough review of earmarked and non-earmarked reserves. So translate that, all the sums of money we have squirreled away for every purpose, to look at the liabilities, back to the earlier conversation, and to be crystal clear, what is the sum of those reserves that we could draw upon, which is the point of that 3 million. It should be very clear that the 3 million reference you're making, we don't have to set that. It's just a wise thing to do. But you have confidence, I think, in the sum of the paper. I'd rather not, unless you really want it, Chair, go into the HRA and borrowing viability conversation. It's lovely for those who'd love it, but it would take a while.
No, I agree. And I appreciate the fact that we do have a bottom line now, because I know that we've been asking for a while, what is the bottom line and where is it? And I appreciate that it's now been put in. So I think that's a good thing. Unless there's any other questions, I'll carry. Anything else? Okay.
You have the floor.
Fine. Okay. Thank you. One last question. So we currently have a KPI. Actually, let me rethink this, and I'll come back to you later.
Okay. Councillor Parsons, did you have a question? And while you're about to present your question, I'm just looking to the room at Mrs. Rundle over there. I just wonder if maybe during Councillor Parsons' contribution, you might wish to take a seat and give us some insight into the matter of trees, because I think Councillor Scordis and I are particularly interested in seeing what we can do around this.
Thank you, Councillor. I will make a brief reference to trees, and I may come back, if I may, after we've heard Mrs. Rundle. Looking at the way the KPIs are presented, it would be really helpful if the KPIs were listed alongside the intended outcome or impact. Now, going back to Councillor Small's point, you know, looking at income figures for the museum, for the leisure centre and so forth, they don't tell us the intended outcome. Now, if I was to look at residual household waste, well, that tells me how much, it's pretty obvious, we're trying to reduce stuff going to landfill. If we're looking at trees again, is the intended outcome increasing biodiversity? Is it about reducing carbon emissions? Or is it about landscape character? I don't know. And that's actually quite significant, not just in terms of a scrutiny and governance perspective. So, for example, are hedges included with trees in that figure? Because hedges on farmland are an incredibly important source of biodiversity. In fact, there is a direct relationship between the number of species in a hedgerow and the age of that hedgerow, which is one of the reasons that actually the figures are very different in continental Europe, because they don't have hedgerows so much because of the land inheritance system in places like France. So it would just be really, really helpful, and I'd appreciate some response on this, if in reporting these figures, you could give us what they're intended to achieve, because the KPIs are about processes. And if we can't link those together, we can't do much in terms of commenting.
I think it's a very fair point. Any KPIs of the moment reflect past discussion. I would just say this about what members want to see and what we think the public want to see. There is a natural instinct. I know assume you'll understand this, but I'm sure we will all appreciate that things you can count do tend to lead you to counting things. It's the drawback and weakness of KPIs. But your central point about looking always at the context, what we're seeking to gain from what we do, does drive decision making, and I've got no difficulty at all with us taking away at that point and continuing when we come to reforming the new KPIs and when we come to reporting them to see what else we can add, Martin. There's shared ground. But as I say, each year it's a question about what, without killing yourself in judgment of what you can count and the purposes for which things could contribute, what you choose to settle on. The KPIs, some of them I think are so manifestly clear as not to require the kind of contextual conversation getting into. And I actually love it because I was behind the woodland and became the woodland and biodiversity planting programme, seems to run into the ground. So we'll hear from Mel about that in a minute, and I'll see if it's more than resources, which I think is probably the primary issue. But no, it's a fair point, and we'll take that away. Thank you.
On this, Councillor Rowe, I want to bring in...
on the KPIs. So I'm trying to bring together all the points effectively that I made in the last three, and I ultimately believe that I feel like there's a disconnect here somewhere. And I think we currently have a KPI of 3 families per 1,000 households in temporary accommodation. Right? However, this is 3.85. It's stated in the document this is because of asylum seekers. I think it states in the document. It says, and I assume that's because of the hotels, etc., that have been shut down. The fact that we're a sanctuary city. So when we're faced with this issue, and the fact that we're missing our target on this KPI, is it sort of a failure of the administration's housing policy to build and understand, I suppose, going back to Martin's point of what are we trying to achieve here? And is it a failure of the policy that we have here when we're spending £205 million through borrowed money whilst families are suffering in temporary accommodation, given that we agree that we all should build homes? Should we not be looking at other areas and other ways of providing these houses and these homes to home the people that we have on the list? For example, I think we've discussed before, the ability to use prefab homes. I think there's examples in Chelmsford and there's previous examples in Ipswich, and I'm sure there's examples across the country. What are we trying to achieve here? Are we just simply trying to get to a number, or are we trying to actually house as many people as we possibly can? Because if we are trying to house as many families and people as we possibly can, I really genuinely believe that we've got the wrong strategy here, and the KPIs are not necessarily showing that this is, I feel like we're just, sort of, putting a random number in there as 3 rather than 3.85 out of 1,000, when we should be saying, okay, how many houses do we have, and how do we house the most amount of people? What is the most efficient strategy for us to house those vulnerable families?
I don't see the conflict that you describe, if I'm honest. I mean, this session's not about looking at Colchester Borough homes in the round. That we do elsewhere. It's not to say that it is entirely appropriate for you to, or anybody, to challenge the KPIs we use and whether or not, let's go back to what we're supposed to be doing, whether or not we're meeting them. They're inevitably selective. They don't show you the sum of the operation. That's what those of us who are on Colchester Borough homes can see. It's what we can see when we have, as we have recently, Colchester Borough Homes Chief Exec and Chair of the Board and others here giving evidence. We do look at this in the round. When we look at when we have the housing revenue account review, we'll be in all that rich picture of what makes up the operations of such a significant operation. Running 5,500 homes and looking after the families and people in them. This, I think, I'm not saying it can't be better, but I think even just glancing at it right now, it does what a set of KPIs should do, I suggest, Thomas. It provides an insight into what's happening in that organisation against the things that we've said are most important. And crucially, that's about the number of people we can't find a home for. So if we go back to the outcomes conversation, people being homeless is an outcome we don't want. So being really upfront and tracking that, and then being prepared to talk to that here or in another place, is the right thing to go and do. These KPIs, I think, including Void's early conversation we had, these are entirely reasonable insights into that significant operation for us.
Okay, I want to get to an end of this item to an end shortly, but we have had Mrs. Rundle waiting patiently to give us an insight into trees. Go for it.
Thank you. So firstly, I think I would say that absolutely Councillor Parsons and Councillor Scottish, you make some really valid points in terms of how we can look at that KPI, because I agree it's about improving biodiversity, reducing our carbon footprint and looking at the landscape. It's all of those things, but how do you measure that? And actually perhaps the KPI should be around planting successful trees, because we know that some of them do die. So, and I wanted to just explain, I guess, in terms of the element around the lack of planting in recent years. Some of that is due to resource, because of the volume of trees we already have in Colchester and the work we do on behalf of Essex County Council trees, we have a very small tree team of tree officers. I think it's 3 full-time equivalents covering thousands, so we're not even achieving what we need to on our existing trees. Hence the conversation with Essex County Council about actually can we continue to do that on your behalf, because if we were able to do our own trees, we might even be able to generate some more income, which we've started to do. But also in terms of planting trees, I think sometimes the thing that people don't realise is whilst we can get some funding, and we have offered funding for trees, for the whips as they're called, actually there is then a cost to the person going out and actually identifying the location. There's then a 2-year cost in terms of watering them to ensure that where possible they do survive. And there is, as I say, a resource implication. So it's actually £500 per whip that's planted, and that's a cost to us. And we've recently been offered some more, and actually the pressure on the council for planting some of the trees under the Urban Treescape Fund, I think it's called, would be about £20,000 and the officer resource. So, and in terms of biodiversity, as I'm sure some of you will know, there is a new requirement under planning law now, which I don't profess to know everything about, but there is a requirement on new developments to increase canopy cover by 10% with developments over a certain size. So certainly in terms of new developments and things, that is moving in the right direction to support our biodiversity aims.
Thank you for that very useful insight. I enjoyed hearing about that. Okay, unless anyone wishes to challenge me, and please do if you like, I'm going to congratulate Councillor Jay's presentation. I'm going to, on behalf of the committee, say that we would like to see these reds turn to amber and green. And I don't think I need to say anything more than that, really, because we could continue this conversation for another 3 hours, but we do want to see improvements. So whatever you within your gift and cabinet colleagues can do, working with officers and CBH, we'd like to see that, if that's possible. Is that all right, guys? Okay, in which case at 7:30 I'm going to call a 15-minute break, please. Back here promptly at 7:45. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. 7:45-ish. Welcome back. Thank you very much for promptly returning. We're now moving on to item 12, Financial Planning Framework 2025-6, all the way through to 29-30. And I believe we have some colleagues dialing in, and we will no doubt hear from them shortly. We've not got Councillor Corey here, have we, tonight? Just checking. In which case, we'll move straight over to our colleagues in finance to introduce this item.
Good evening, Chairman, and good evening, members of the committee. So item 12 is the draft financial planning framework for 2025-26 to 29-30. Members will recall that the budget development process for 24-25, which was successful in producing a balanced budget that was scrutinised by this panel and eventually adopted by full council in 2024. The process included extensive member and other stakeholder consultations, as well as some new features, including a 5-year extended capital programme that was fully aligned to the medium-term financial revenue forecast, the MTFF. The report covered in pages 31 to 44 of your agenda this evening sets out a proposed financial planning framework for 25-26 to 29-30, which consolidates the development work completed last year, adds further improvements, including an additional update to the medium-term financial framework, and perhaps the eye-catching feature is a new strategy to prepare an initial balanced budget for 25-26 for consideration by Cabinet by late November, which is some 2 months earlier than the established process. A proposed timetable is presented on pages 41 to 43, which includes provision for further scrutiny of the 25-26 budget by this panel in both September and January, as is usually the case. Pages 33 to 37 set out the context in which the 25-26 budget will be developed and also the medium-term financial framework. This includes consideration of the revenue and capital positions for the general fund and the housing revenue account, as well as the balance sheet context. Page 38 sets out the scene on the MTFF and concludes with 2 supporting strategies that will be produced alongside the budget, namely the capital and treasury management strategies. And that's all I wanted to say for now. Thank you, Chair, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Right, members.
Thank you. So I think the Fit for Future scheme is a great scheme, and it's right that we're budgeting cautiously. Colchester Commercial Holdings, one of its goals is to generate profit to return dividends to the council. And in a cautious budget, one of the risk mitigations that we have available to us is to generate funds. So I'm just wondering how that is catered for within the framework.
If I may, Chair. So I would say that it's one of the sort of source pieces of information that will be required in order to develop the budget. So we'll, I imagine, CCHL will produce a business plan for the forthcoming year. We'll set out their expectations, which will come through probably governance and audit, I believe, for scrutiny and checking, really. But that will include a forecast of potential returns generated by Colchester Holdings that will be a feature or an element that'll need to be built into the budget planning process for next year. So, as I say, it'll be one of those kind of source documents that will help us to populate the budget for next year. Yeah.
Okay, whilst members are thinking up questions, I'll just chuck something in there then and just ask, the obvious really, which is that we are exposing ourselves to significant risk with the borrowing. We have an understanding at the moment that inflation has come down and rates may well be coming down, but nevertheless there's real risk there. Can you give us some assurances around the prudence of the reserves to deal with this? Because as you've stated, there is risk there.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I can. I mean, I think it's important to stress that this paper really is just setting out the timetable of all the process that will go through to arrive at those numbers and give you, the members of this committee, and indeed all members, reassurance. So that these are all things that will need to be done as part of the budget development process. They will come, the reassurance that you need will come from various sources. Now, for example, the CCHL business plan will provide some reassurance and scrutiny, and then be scrutinised to tell us what numbers will come from Amphora. There will be a medium-term financial framework refresh, which will be the next stage in the process beyond this paper. So the next paper that comes to this committee will be an update of some of the key assumptions that the medium-term financial framework is built upon, and that's when we'll start sort of surfacing some of the estimate assumptions that we'll be using to generate the budget, including balances, including reserves, including borrowing costs, inflation, all of those sort of things will come forward at that point in time. Reserves themselves are part of the year-end process. So what we're currently trying to do, and we're quite close to now, is determining what the outcome is for 23-24. And as part of that, we'll have a balance sheet which will include our level of reserves. But we need to conclude that process first of all before we can say to the council, this is our starting point for that we'll use in developing the budget for 25-26. So that's to say, that's another kind of cornerstone of the budget development framework, is our outcome for 23-24, economic data, and for borrowing costs, the HRA review, all factors that go collectively come together to inform us in developing the budget for 25-26 and beyond.
Thank you for that. And just broadly, I think I would say that I would welcome the dates that have been set out and giving this panel and other committees an earlier opportunity to look at and scrutinise. That's really welcome. And also, as you mentioned, having a 5-year approach to capital is obviously to be welcomed. I can't add much more value at this point. I'm going to look around the room. Okay, we all content? Then thank you very much, gentlemen. I see you there. We note your strategy. Thank you very much. Sorry, guys, I have a shaving cut that's just emerged on my chin, so it's okay. Okay, right, we will move on with my shaving cut neck. We will move on and we will go to item 13, which is Mrs. Turnbull and Mr. Sterling, and we're going to be talking about Colchester's assets. Yeah, come join us. It is a shaving cut. I don't know what triggered it though. Sorry, colleagues, I've just requested a plaster from First Aid because my shaving cut might be, a bit disgusting for some and not hygienic, so we'll get a plaster. There's a first, isn't it? Right. Okay, we're having a great evening. Let's continue then. So, this report was, this is an update, isn't it, on ongoing work. Let's take it back and remember that it was Councillor Willits who instigated a conversation because others were particularly concerned around the arrangements associated with the Victorian Grandstand in Castle Park, which has triggered a wider conversation around opportunities to make the most of some of Colchester and indeed this council's space and assets in the public dimension to make Colchester an even better place than it already is. Can't say that enough. It is great. We want to make it better. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And I won't talk for long on this because you've got the report where the three of us are happy to take questions on it. But just to contextualise it a bit to add to what you've said, this builds on a couple of conversations you've had, I think, in February this year and towards the end of last year, where you were particularly focused on the Castle Park and the bandstand in particular. We've got some information in the report about the bandstand, and I'm hoping you'll see that as a positive outcome. So to clarify, users are not, there is no charge for users. There is a booking system to avoid clashes and to minimise the chances of unreasonable disturbance for neighbours, but the number of slots has been increased. So Alistair's here, and he's the relevant manager from the events business, and would be happy to take questions. But partly inspired by that conversation, and partly because of the work we're doing as part of the town deal and levelling up work, we decided the time was right to look at Colchester's other public assets. So existing ones, but also ones that are coming on stream, like St Nicholas Square. You'll see that work is underway at the moment. Trinity Square, where there's planning permission to develop it into a pocket park, work likely to happen towards the end of this year or next year. And there's loads of agencies involved in this business, if you like, but it's quite uncoordinated at the moment. So what the report details is the work chiefly Karen has been doing to bring people together to see what works well at the moment, but how we could make this work better. And we're not at the point of a firm conclusion yet, so I don't want to prejudge it, but Karen's held numerous one-to-ones with relevant partners such as our own events company, the Business Improvement District, and also regular, frequent flyers, if you like, so people like the Mercury Theatre, the Arts Centre and the like, Creative Colchester, culminating in bringing them together to talk about what is working well and what could be done better. And there was a general consensus that some degree of coordination would be helpful, so that we have we don't want to stifle individual enterprise, so we don't want to make it more bureaucratic and make it harder for individual groups to organise events that animate the city centre, but we want to make sure that there's a central programme. So if not a festival, then at least a coordinated programme, and that players can work to their strengths. So some people would be better at organising what should be laid on, others are better placed to actually deliver those events, so to allow people to do that. But work in progress, and we wanted to bring it to you today really just to give you a chance to give us input, but also keep you abreast of what's happening.
Excellent. Right, members, questions please. Are we all happy? Looks like we are.
Can I ask a very quick
Councillor
question?
Rowe, go for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. So, apologies if I've misread this, but do we actually have a list of the assets? I couldn't see it in there. Was there a list of the assets in there?
So the City Council has been working on a list of the assets we own, but actually for this work it's slightly different, because what we wanted to do was to list relevant public open spaces, whoever owns them, and that has been part of the work. We haven't included the list in the report, but one of the things that caused smoke to come out of Karen's ears was trying to think of all of the public spaces, and actually by working with partners we've added some to that because they've pointed out some that they think are relevant that we'd missed.
Yeah, I can imagine it's not a particularly easy thing to do. So from there, have we managed to rank that list, as in, what we think are our most beneficial assets? And, do we have from there sort of, I don't know, the top 10, 20, whatever it is, list of ideas that we think we can use to utilise those assets for the benefit of Colchester Council?
We haven't ranked them as such, but what has come out in this work, because one of the stakeholders we've talked to is our own regulatory services, and what we often hear both from them and people trying to organise events is that it's almost like the system set up for a clash, so that people try and apply to do something and then it's not appropriate. So and obviously that's disappointing on the organiser's part, but it's also time consuming on our side. So what we want to do is to proactively describe what sort of the features of each public space and what sort of events they'd be suitable for. So some events have neighbours around them, so they're not going to work well for evening events maybe, but they might be perfectly good for something else. Other events are more isolated, locations are more isolated, so I think what we'll end up doing is giving a sort of a guide to each location with a steer of the sort of things we want there.
That's excellent, and that's sort of what I'm getting at. But I suppose also, would we proactively, or I don't know, some other area of the council proactively go out to I don't know, people that put on events, for example, and say, we have this particular facility, we think you can put on X, Y, and Z here, it would be suitable for this, and try to drum up that business, I suppose.
Well, the events company definitely do that already, and obviously they're very income driven, so they definitely do it. I think the point of the programme is that we curate a programme and then go out and source people to deliver it. So to try and to move beyond the ad hoc and to think actually how do we want to promote and sell Colchester. So the events company have proved very successful at doing it to generate income, and this isn't in competition with that, but this is to say what isn't the market delivering at the moment? What else do we want?
Thank you.
And I'm right in saying that at the moment this is an urban centre focus, but that probably, if an obvious opportunity arose between here and North Station or here in the Hive, you're not restricting it to the Roman walls, are you? Okay. Okay. Well, I get it. Right, Councillor Appleton, go for it.
Thank you very much. It says here that there aren't so many large spaces in the city centre, and we know that. Quite excited about St Nicholas Square and the potential there. What sort of ideas do you have for events there? What's for that space? Thank you.
We're going to frustrate you. We're probably not there yet. St Nick Square, I mean, it will be fantastic once it's redeveloped. So it will have lots of things going for it for events in terms of, an attractive public realm, open, quite a lot of space, more accessible space, and some cafes and bars around it as well. Of course, it also has a hotel right by it, so we have to be mindful of the people trying to get a night's kip there. And there are people who live not far from it. So I think one of the next chunks of work will be for Karen to take our licensing people out to work out what is likely to get approval there. And just to add to the complications, it's tricky if we license something to happen in the square that we wouldn't license one of the businesses to do regularly around the square. So we have to think of fairness as well. But yeah, and I think the point is, what we're likely to end up doing is to get a group of non-council people, so people like the BID, Creative Colchester, to create the programme. Because actually, it's very nice that you asked me, but I'd be the worst person to think of what should happen in the public space. I'm a public servant, I'm a bureaucrat. It won't be exciting. So we need people like Firesight, Creative Colchester, the BID to think about it, and then, but our role is to facilitate that.
Right, yeah, great news about the bandstand, absolutely fantastic. And I really hope that goes out on the socials as well so we communicate it, because I don't think everybody knows about that just now. With regard to the coordination, what do you think that will look like?
The next step for us is to test some ideas with representatives from the BID and from people who are already working in that, including the events company, and then to develop a model and then sort of work with an organisation to develop it further. So we're kind of midway here, and we've tentatively tested it out with both the regulators and organisers of events that we've spoken to. It was well received. I think we're all on the same page, just maybe different areas of the page, but we're getting closer to it. So I'm confident that within a couple of 3 months we'll have something a bit more concrete. And a clearer way forward to animating the city centre, which is in all of our interests, really.
Well, I think this is excellent. It's great to see the cross-fertilisation happening. Alistair, I mean, we know what events you guys are responsible for. They're big and they're getting bigger. And some of these things you've been describing won't be as big as that necessarily, but there's obviously going to be cross-fertilisation. Great to hear the Business Improvement District are in there as well. Councillor Rowe.
Yeah, apologies to jump in. From a sort of delivery perspective, what are we defining as success for this project? Like, how do we define if we've met our objectives or not? Because I've read through and I understand it, and I agree with it, and I sort of get with where you're coming from, but I don't think there's anything written down as to what we define as this means this project has been successful.
I suppose short and long-term goals. So short-term success is that we have fewer applications for street entertainment refused. We have a coordinated programme, things seem more vibrant. But long-term goal, the real goal, is more footfall, more customers in the city centre, more successful businesses.
So I think they're all admirable goals, and it would be really good if we could get that into the document somehow. So I think that we should sort of see what we can do, if that's possible.
This is an interim update. This is great. Just keep going. And yeah, let's in the end get some measurables. I'm sure we will, but this is really good. I think everyone agrees. This is really good. Thank you very much.
Well done. Keep going.
Right. Now that I've got a plaster on my neck and I'm not bleeding into a shirt, I feel a little bit more comfortable. We're going to move on now to, is it the last item? Well, one of the last items, number 13, which is Middle Mill. I must say it again, Middle Mill, because I was saying Middlewick earlier. Right, we have Fiona, who is here to talk to us about the report, but we also have members of the public here who have a very, very specific connection to an aspect impacted by what has happened. I'm really sorry you've had to wait this long. Thank you for your patience, but hopefully you'll enjoy this process. So just to remind ourselves, tonight is not about making a decision about it. This is an interim report on where things are at, and I think time is on our side, so we can have a conversation here, and the leader of the council is here to listen to that. Your contributions are going to be really important. So in your own time, step up. You've got 3 minutes to have your say.
My name is Amanda Gilmore and I am the current chair of Colchester Canoe Club. Since the club started, our coaches and volunteers have introduced a huge number of people from the local area to paddleboard. The numbers are in the region of 30,000 children and 50,000 adults. Our coaching team has consistently delivered free coaching for around 40 years. In the last 2 years, we have looked closely at our target demographic with a view to expanding our services. Some of our members have joined us from disadvantaged backgrounds. With the provision of kit, equipment and coaching, a few of us have been able to achieve exceptional outcomes, representing our country at competition level, but above all else, found enjoyment from an activity they would be otherwise unable to access. We have developed a plan to make paddle sport accessible for individuals and families from our less affluent local areas. On one level, in the hope of assisting the next world-class paddler to achieve their potential. On another level, to provide a family activity at no cost. We aim to support the health and well-being of families from disadvantaged backgrounds and to promote a feeling of community by linking in with established services such as urban support and active Essex. We have made steps to be included on the social prescribing list. We have a plan in place to change the current club structure in order to support this vision. All of the plans are currently on hold. In the short term, for safety, we are unable to access the river. In the long term, our ability to deliver our plan hinges entirely on the water levels. The current water level has left inherent dangers we cannot mitigate for introducing new paddlers. Freestyle kayaking itself is a rapidly developing discipline of paddle sport. It is likely to become an Olympic sport in the coming years. As a country, we are a serious contender on the world stage. As a club, we have had a hand in the support and development of some of the most skillful and renowned paddlers in the world. Paddlers that in some cases would not have been able to access the sport without our support. Colchester Canoe Club's freestyle branch achieved third place in the European Club Championships last year. The development of many of the skills needed to compete has been as a direct result of the privilege of being able to use the weir gate at Middle Mill to create a standing wave. The collapse of the structure has been catastrophic for a number of reasons. one of which has been the total loss of our club's activities. Our designated club liaison officer from British Canoeing has suggested the possibility of Sport England supporting the cost of rebuilding the weir due to its significance to paddle sports in the UK. British Canoeing is now known as Paddle UK, and they would be happy to support an application made for this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, does it make sense for Mr. Waters to come and have his say, and then I'll make some initial comments and you guys both come back? Does that make sense? Yeah. Go for it.
There we go. Good evening, my name is Steve Waters. I'm currently treasurer with Colchester Canoe Club, but I also do some voluntary work with Essex Wildlife as a river warden. So we monitor the river and Get River Positive campaign, which is run by Anglian Water. So we monitor the quality of the water as well, along with river flag testing. So we get in the water with our waders on and kick up the fuss and see what insects are in the water, a rough guide how the quality is of the river. It's been an option that naturalising the river cone may be the best course of action in light of the collapse of the weir at Middle Mill. The naturalisation of a river is not simply a case of leaving it to its own devices. It does require a plan. A team did develop that plan and a list of proposed outcomes in line with Water Frame Directive and Habitats regulations. The government has published both recommendations and legislation to underpin the naturalisation of waterways. The cone has a designation of heavy modified. It has been constrained in one form or another for over 1,000 years. Therefore, some human assistance would be required to remediate it back to its natural condition. Just one example of an issue that would be need to address is the currently unstable riverbanks due to the recent changes in hydrology. Colchester Canoe Club, in line with the Get River Positive project from Anglian Water, along with Colchester University's project for testing for human waste transfer, regularly tests the water in the river. Over the years, we've been aware of heavy industrial contaminants, including heavy metals. These contaminants have been in very small quantities. There is a high likelihood that the many tons of silt along the watercourse contain elevated levels sufficient to classify any silt removed as hazardous waste. For many years, the silt has been held in situ. With the collapse of the structure of Middle Mill and the resultant change in level, flow and general hydrology of the river, a new geomorphic process may allow large areas of the silt to mobilise and disperse the contaminants held within. There is a document that you can access, which is part of, I think you've all got a copy of this anyway, haven't you? So you can access that on the web. The freshwater section of the cone would automatically receive protected status as it is used to draw water off for drinking. Further to this, the river runs through two sites of special scientific interest, the Roman River and the Cone Estuary, which is also a national nature reserve, a wetland site of international importance, a special protection area, and a special area of conservation. Nearly said conversation. We know Ardley Reservoir Committee have raised concern around contaminants being washed downstream, preventing the draw off of water for the reservoir, and that there is a real risk posed for the security of the public water supply. They have also recommended a rebuild of the sluice to help reduce the amount of silt at their take-off point at Eastgate's Weir. And I believe at present they're waiting for a response to the last letter they sent. Can the council give us some assurance that the move in silt in the river won't affect these assets, and are considering the option of rebuilding the sluice with its effect on the silt movement? Thank you.
Mr. Waters, thank you, and Amanda, thank you for that. So I just want to clarify in my mind a few facts, so I'm clear at the beginning stages of this conversation. So you guys are based, are you not, at the old Colchester Lido, the 1930s concrete-based Lido by Colne Bank Avenue? That's where your clubhouse is, that's where your kit is. and that's your main entry point. In fact, do you want to come up to so we can hear you on the microphone? It's fine. Yeah, come back, because it's right that people at home. Okay. So just to help with our understanding, and my understanding, and everyone's got different levels of understanding about what you guys do. So let's go back right from the beginning. You're based at the old Lido.
Yep,
You've got a big clubhouse there with loads of kayaks and canoes. Some are sort of like more casual ones, like what I would use just to poodle about. Some are more sporty ones to do the flips and the fun stuff that
We've got a very large selection of kit. As a club, we have been very, very careful over the years, and also what we've tried to do is reach out to as many different types of individuals, different styles of paddling. So as a club, we've got a very big club fleet, and there's a huge selection of boats available for people.
And so you launch from, let's say, the Colchester Lido, as it was, and you go down towards North Station Bridge. You go underneath the bridge into Castle Park, and obviously at Middle Mill, you used to hit that point where the water changes. As a consequence of what's happened there, the water levels dropped. You've got no opportunity further on in Lower Castle Park to do any of these stunts because the water's at the same level. There's no structures there, are there? It just goes round, and you've got no portage around East Gates, where the huge separation between saltwater and freshwater is. There's no portage there, is there?
No. I mean, on the Colne itself, there isn't any real portages. So where we would normally go downstream, we'd use Middle Mill Weir. We were able to operate that to create a standing wave. So what then happens is that paddlers can get their first opportunity to learn basic whitewater skills on the flow that will come away from that feature and then work their way up. So as a club, we've got qualified coaches that are able to take people that have just started kayaking and doing those sort of baby stages right up to being able to use the feature to do the more dynamic tricks and moves. As it is right now, we are just incredibly limited in the pool area. When the weir was still in place, the pool area would fluctuate in levels, but we was always able to, we call it a sill launch. So you'd be at the side of the pool and you can launch your boat in. At the moment now, the silt build up in some parts is up to your waist. So I'm 5'10", but the silt build up is because the water level has come down so much. If you paddle upstream, some parts of it, I did try that a couple of weeks ago.
It's choked with reeds, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you always get reeds anyway this time of year. You kind of expect it. Most rivers, I mean, the River Stour, it's very well looked after. Both Steve and I volunteer on that river as well. So, they do sort of cut things back and, get rid of some of the weeds. But we do expect that. However, at the moment, the banks are so high. So kayakers do rely on, if there isn't a designated portage, you can find a bank and then, you can get out on the bank. At the moment, they are really high and some parts are really quite unstable. I got out for a period of time because it's so low, you're on, just the base of the river. It was a lot easier to get out and walk your boat. But as a club, I'm a competent paddler at the moment. Because we love what we do so much, our most competent and most, dedicated members are still coming down, so we can still be together as part of that community. For us, it's devastating that we're not able to take new people on. I regularly get emails from people saying, what's happening? Can we come and join? Can we bring our children? One of our youngest members was 5 years old, and I'm not going to disclose Steve's age, but
So Amanda, I'm taking an unorthodox approach here because we don't usually have a two-way like this. But since you've been so patient to sit here tonight, I wanted you to have airtime. I've got some other areas I just want to get clarity on. So you've described to us very clearly about the more sporty use and how the weir not being there is a problem. Can you tell us about just regular people that want to have a little casual poodle about the river? With the river dropping so low, is that difficult at certain
Yeah.
points with why is it difficult?
So at the moment, if you imagine, I suppose if we looked at the weir as like a group of beavers creating a dam, you had a really consistent level. So where the river naturally then drops off, you've got a nice consistent level to go up to there. You then get out and then you get back into the other side, which is what we would call the weir pool. At the moment, as you travel down the river, I think it's Middlesbrough Bridge. There's just a trickle.
Middleborough Bridge, yeah.
Yeah, there's
Station.
literally a trickle of water, and all you see is exposed rocks, all the rubbish that unfortunately people put in there, which for us is also devastating, because you'll see on social media everyone complaining about the rubbish, but prior to the weir collapse, I think you would struggle to see any complaints, because it was Colchester Canoe Club that was cleaning it. At the moment, we're walking past and we're looking, and we can't get onto certain parts to clean it. The parts that we can get onto, we are loading up our kayak decks with, everybody's bottles and things like that. So at the moment, I'd implore anyone, take a walk down the river. I did have a look actually at, as you do, social media, and then also looking at when people are selling their homes along the river. And, one of the selling points is scenic views, and I wouldn't describe it as that. For a kayaker and for, a very passionate member of Colchester Canoe Club, I look at that waterway and it brings tears to my eyes, as I know it will Steve, because Steve is, one of the founding members of the club. It started when there wasn't any reeds in the pool area. They originally started off as a slalom club, and style changes over the years, and Colchester Canoe Club have been definitely instrumental over the last couple of years of pushing freestyle kayaking development at club level, which has been recognised by GB Freestyle, and yeah, it's heartbreaking to have to email these officials and say, we can't do anything right now. Or, our paddlers that are, especially our youth paddlers, they've got to pay to travel to Nottingham, or they've got to pay to go to Lee Valley, whereas they were able to train at their home club with, people that they've been taught by. So yeah, it's really
I'm not going to break your heart because I'm actually rooting for you, but I would say that to play devil's, that yes, the river looks awful at the moment, but in time there could be more naturalisation, because I've seen it with my own eyes as per what's happened in Houston. But that doesn't do anything for the river level. Even if it does naturalise, that doesn't do anything for the river level.
And I think that's the concern we have. Of course, for kayakers, for people that use these waterways, blue spaces, green spaces are really important to us. We use them.
Yeah.
Naturalising the river, I have looked at lots of other projects. Europe are really successful at doing it, not as much cost as this country. And I think my concern is that, to rebuild the weir, yes, that is an expense. To naturalise the river is also an expense, and it's also going to take upkeep. It's not just going to be able to do it on its own. So you're going to have to employ people to take care of the river. And I struggle myself to find, are the council going to do that when nobody else has cleaned it? It's Colchester Canoe Club that regularly do the river cleans, as I know you know that. So yeah, we have some concerns. Naturalising rivers can make them look absolutely stunning and beautiful. However, the Colne doesn't lend itself very well. The shape of the Colne has got to be completely changed, and there's got to be, a big investment financially to make it look better. And then, is it going to be a waterway that can then be used for water sports? So I think as a club, that's, there's lots of reassurances that we're needing definitely for the future of the club. You can't have a football team without footballs and a goal. So you can't have a canoe club without water.
Okay.
Thank you.
Amanda and Steve, thank you very much for that insight. I'm sorry I probed you a bit, but I just wanted to clarify as much as I could. What we will do now then, colleagues, is We will hear this interim report from Fiona. I will just set some more context, which is that this is a really complicated one, because what we're talking about here is more than just the weir. It's having an impact on the bridge, which is an Essex Highways asset, which means that people cannot walk and cycle across there at the moment, which is really, really not good. And as you've heard from Sir Bob earlier, it feels like it's going on. It could go on longer. Our role here tonight is not to make a recommendation on what should definitely happen, because we're not being presented with a set of clear options, but we do have scope to have a conversation and add to the discourse that might result in a final report of choices coming here, probably before it goes to Cabinet. I'm looking at the leader and seeing if that might be something we could do, to see if we do want to offer a solution, because there possibly is going to be a cost implication. Although great to hear that you think that there might be grants available from the sporting guys, there may well be grants available from a heritage point of view in terms of the mill itself, maybe even a green grant on the basis that you might be able to generate some sort of energy of some sort. I don't know, that's not my field, but I've talked far too much. Fiona, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. This is very much an interim update. As we were asked, we came a few months ago and gave us first report on where we were, and this report simply updates the last report, showing the progress that we've made since the last update. And it also presents the results of the consultation that was sort of underway the last time we came and updated you, and that consultation was with the formal bodies that are relevant to this piece of work, and also the local resident groups and community groups such as the Canoe Club. And this then sets out a bit of a timeline of the works that have been undertaken since, because I know there's been some concerns about what are we doing, because people can't see those things necessarily on the ground, but just to show you what we are working on in the background. And then it gives a summary of the consultation feedback. So basically obviously when you consult, some groups have given us much more feedback. So I've done a summary for each of those groups with some of the key points, and I have had the summaries approved by those groups, and that's why you're able to see all of those in the paper here this evening. I've also included in here a bit of a summary, the summary of those consultation and some of the sort of known areas of future work that we're going to need to do, depending on what we move forward with over time, but we're not quite at that stage, but just to give you a bit of an idea about that. So obviously I'm happy to take some questions on that this evening.
Thank you. I thought it was a very good report. I think that Sir Bob's frustration in the timescale is legitimate, but I think the evidence in this report says that we were absolutely right to go out there and consult widely, because, as I said many times in this one, there could be competing interests, and we've got to find a way through, and we've got to find a way of funding whatever that solution is as well. I'm sure everyone wants to have a say. I see Councillor Parsons, Councillor Scordis, and Councillor Smalls. Let's do it in threes. Councillor Parsons. I think if we direct our energy towards Fiona, have a conversation, go for it.
Okay. So, thank you for that. The first question is, having listened to these guys, I think the Canoe Club is doing a fantastic job, and in terms of our wider concerns as a council, things like antisocial behaviour, getting kids out canoeing, head underwater, one of those first things I know they do, that's got to be great for all of that stuff. Are we thinking as a council, big picture here, of what sports, like particularly in this instance, river canoeing, which, having talked to them at break, is very different from sea canoeing in terms of all the regs and stuff they have to go through, that we would like to see happening in Colchester Borough City Council area, and developing a plan to how we can facilitate that, because it's possible, quite possible, that the way this will end up is not going to be helpful to these guys. But are we thinking more broadly about those things, how we can help facilitate these kind of things? What do we want to see sport-wise in the area?
I'll come back on that one. I would say absolutely it would part of our health and wellbeing strategy and work that we're doing within another part of the council and the alliance to look at all of those things in relation to sport, health and wellbeing activities and all of those things, but that wouldn't necessarily fit within the remit of this piece of work. But
Yeah.
I would suggest that it's absolutely being looked at as part of the health and wellbeing strategy.
Okay. Second question, we heard the word geomorphic processes. Geomorphology, which is about, in this instance, river landforms, and hydrology, and fluvial processes, and so forth. Whatever you do to a river has a big impact on those. I've been involved in the past in another role quite a bit with river management. I'm wondering whether we've got sufficient expertise within the council staff team, or whether on some of these kind of reports it might be helpful to perhaps they have a cooperative agreement with, say, tendering, because although they've got a coastal management team and coastal geomorphology, there are significant differences. There are also some significant overlaps, and they would probably have more angle on that. Do you feel we've got on that kind of the fluvial geomorphology, coastal management for that reason?
We would absolutely love to have that within our team, but unfortunately we don't have that level of resource in-house. So we obviously have taken a lot of advice from the Environment Agency, obviously who are the government body leading on rivers across the country. But also we're working with a structural engineer at the moment as well, looking at some of the impacts of those kind of things as well. So yeah, we don't have that resource in-house.
Okay, let me just go to my third and final one for now. The issue with Environment Agency is they have unique permissive powers without actually being required to do anything. And I can see a particular problem, and forgive me because I've not looked into this because I substituted on this committee at the last minute and I've had an hour to read the papers. 2010 Flood and Water Management Act, my recollection is that something like Section 38 gives them permission to basically do pretty well anything, including creating erosion and flooding, for a whole range of reasons, including nature conservation, heritage, all sorts of stuff. I'm just feeling from the answer I've just heard from you, and this is not a criticism in any respect whatsoever, whether it might be more helpful to talk to another local council that would be somewhat more impartial and independent in their advice on these issues.
It would just depend whether they had the appropriate resources. I'm not aware of a lot of councils who have that specialist advice in-house. Some teams might have it as part of their engineering department, for example, if they had that. I know that we don't have that, certainly that level available to us here at Colchester. I think that's the sort of resource that we would look to buy in specialists for that, to be able to advise appropriately. For that, I guess I don't really want to comment. I mean, I can't comment on the organisation of the Environment Agency and how they run and are organised. That's not my place to do that.
Councillor Scordis.
Thanks, Chair. And I mean, we've had issues with this historically where we just don't have that expertise. So Fieldgate Quay collapsing was a big one as well. Not a bit more costly than what we're expecting here. But really helpful to have the canoe club here to give their perspective. It is a bit disappointing the cabinet member went home, because I think that would have been very beneficial for them to hear the social value and physical value of this. And hopefully that sways to our favour, because I think there's a big discussion here about what the future of that section of the river is moving forward as well. Because that will be determined on what decision Cabinet make in the end once all the costings and so forth are done. What would be interesting, Fiona, is have we actually looked at doing some local fundraising on this? because other councils have done things on this. Not all of them have had a weir collapse, but they've done it on other projects. So I do wonder if that's maybe an option, because I think it would be quite popular. There are obviously other concerns about ownership and so forth. So 50% is owned by the county council, who don't seem to want to take that ownership, and there are real issues there that we need to address, and maybe it'd be good to hear back if there has been any further progress when this comes back to us, because that is worrying. It can't just be all on Colchester City Council, because we do need their permission as well, if Essex own 50%. But yeah, I don't think we have much more to add. As I say, there's no decisions to make. Really helpful report. I think the comments from Canoe Club have, I think, hopefully given us, some of us, a good steer of what we should be doing moving forward. But yeah, not much more to add on to that, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Scorless. Useful contribution. Councillor Smalls.
Yes, thank you to the Canoe Club, because that has helped clarify things in my mind, because when you read the report, so you read one bit, oh yeah, go one way or the other, but that's really brought home the value of the Canoe Club to me. What I have been very curious and concerned about, and I think I don't think I brought this up before, but about if anybody's ever challenged Essex Highways, or about their inspection. So we've got here on the 30th of October 2023, we know that the Canoe Club raised concerns about cracks in the abutments of Essex Highways owned bridge. So I've got no reason to doubt the Canoe Club are using this regularly, every week, more than weekly probably. So that I've got no reason to doubt that. So that was then reported to Essex Highways. They responded there had been no change since 2017. So that would imply that the cracks that the Canoe Club saw had been there since 2017. I find that astonishing. And then we get to 4th of December, which is just over a month later, and the park ranger noted that part of the weir had been undermined. So this happened, quite rapidly. I mean, have Essex Highways ever been challenged about what they actually did and how their inspection took place? Because, I think, if they do bear some responsibility for this, obviously not for the initial thing, but, why would we doubt the Canoe Club? Because this is in direct conflict. If there's been no change since 2017, that would imply that the Canoe Club, the cracks they saw had been there since 2017. So I don't know who would, answer that, but I would like that to be further investigated.
Perhaps the Canoe Club and the leader will challenge me on this one, but the Environment Agency used to have the management of the sluice. It was given to the borough. The borough owns the Middle Mill asset. The Essex Highways own the bridge we walk and cycle over. On that basis, and I'm not trying to defend Essex Highways, because believe me, I am as frustrated with them over Boxted Bridge as everyone living in Boxted is. So I'm not going to defend, but I think there's joint culpability between the borough and Essex on this one, given the complexity of the site, is my understanding. So you're right to ask it, Councillor Smalls, but we are where we are now. We've got to move forward, I would have thought.
I'm not blaming Essex Highways in any way for the actual cracks. What I'm questioning is they responded that there had been no change since 2017. I'm specifically questioning that. I'm not blaming one authority or another for the fact that there were cracks emerging. I'm just worried about the accuracy of the information they gave.
Sorry, Chair. I can't remember. I'm sure we've been over this before, possibly in a previous scrutiny meeting. I believe that there was a discussion where the engineers, it was a discussion around engineers looking at, it was very difficult to understand what was going on underneath the weir and underneath the water, and then how that would impact the bridge above. And ultimately, the discussions around the stability of the bridge, and the bridge was technically stable and hadn't changed since 2017. It was the bits that had underneath that had moved, and it was very difficult for them to review how it had gone. I'm sure that's what that's the the
This is the time when a PowerPoint would be useful,
Yeah,
isn't it? Where we
yeah.
could see precisely what we're talking about. Look,
I'm sure that's what we were told at the time, and that's where we got to, and we all sort of agreed that okay, that's fine. You know, how do we move on from here ultimately?
Fiona.
Yes, you remember that quite correctly. Yeah, it's not unusual, and I think these guys would support that. You know, you paddle under a lot of old bridges and structures, and a lot of them do have cracks in it, so it's not unusual. Just because there's a crack in the outer brickwork of an abutment doesn't mean that the bridge is unstable. It can just be the outer facing of that. They absolutely had seen some change, and these guys see it much more frequently than anybody else, and that obviously was reported through to Essex. And you're quite right, it's their responsibility. Our discussion with Essex Highways about that is that, again, yes, they're not, because the two structures are integrated, the collapse of one structure is potentially affecting the other, and we are seeing what we feel is further movement on those structures now. And obviously the surveying work that we're doing, the next stage of it, actually the radar surveys that we're going to be doing is specifically going to be looking at voids, and voids are the kind of things that you get underwater, hidden, where we can't see those, and they can look and try and find those voids with these radar surveys. So all of the information that we're building at the moment that's taking so long in the background, all of this survey work, it's going to help us build up that picture, not just for us, in that if we want to do a full rebuild, it's going to help provide the plans and the information and the technical specifications for us to be able to go out and tender and get pricing for that, so we know what that option would look like. It's also going to give us the information around what's going on, at the bridge, the Essex Highways bridge as well, and we've already have been having discussions with them, and are absolutely in the cooperative working, going to be sharing that information with them, and there's a few bits just starting to come out of those surveys that we're going to start to give them as soon as we have that, so they can further look into those. We don't want to both be duplicating these pieces of work. We do need to be working together on this. As you've already said, it is very much integrated. And then moving forward, we can both look at what we're going to do, but also those structures are also informing if we're going to need to remove the collapsed structures, whatever we do, really, because they're all half collapsed and they're in the river and they're blocking access to the river for the canoe club, so they can't even go into the mill pond area at the moment because there's bits of these collapsed structures through there. But because some of them are still attached to the brickwork that's still attached to the bridge, we've got to be really careful about how we take that down. It's not just sending in a contractor to whip it all out. We wish it was that straightforward, but anything we do could have an effect on the bridge. And ultimately, anything that was happened to the bridge would affect our structures as well. So we've got to be really sure about those specifications and the background information, so that when we go forward with those specifications for those different areas of work, that we're really sure about what we're going to do and the effects of that, and we do that in a way that's not going to cause more damage going forward.
Thank you.
That was excellent, and as much as we all don't like seeing that black metal fencing that's there now and the restrictions on the movement, it has to be there, because imagine if the bridge collapsed and someone fell in, and that would be on us as well, wouldn't it? So
yeah, we were having a lot of trouble, unfortunately, with people trying to get over that structure, because it is such a popular area and such a popular access point. And it had been consistently vandalised, so we have had, unfortunately, to invest into some stronger security fencing to maintain safety for everybody.
Yeah, 6 miles north of here, Pops Bridge collapsed on the River Store in the 1950s, and a car went in the water. So it's real, and we've got to take that seriously. Okay, any other questioning on this item? Councillor Parsons.
Thank you for reminding me. Just two quick ones. One is that if you put any structure in a river, whether it's now or a few hundred years ago, silt would build up behind it. Now, normally, the process for clearing silt from a river, because it creates a flood risk, is done by the Environment Agency, and it's normally done annually. And any major watercourse, they're responsible for. Now, obviously, there's a few hundred years of silt that have built up there. Is the silt issue being seen as that's only an issue that needs to be dealt with if if the river is naturalised, or is it actually being seen, we actually have a problem with the silt there, we've heard it's waist deep, that needs to be dealt with whether or not that weir is repaired?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So, I just had to describe that. So,
are we the riparian owner of the river at that section, technically?
Technically, yes. Technically. So I would question that the Environment Agency, I don't think, unfortunately, these days are able to remove silt from main rivers annually, although I'm sure that they would love to do that, and sure that people managing those rivers would love that they did that, but I don't think, unfortunately, they're even able to do that anymore. I don't think there was necessarily an issue with silt in the river per se, that I'm aware of. The issue that we've had with silt as a result of the weir collapse is that the silt built up behind that has done a sudden release. And that's the issues that these guys referred to regarding a sudden loading of silt, releasing perhaps bad things that have built up in those silt over the years from agricultural, all sorts of things that will have gone into that through those years upstream, suddenly being released. And the actual silt itself is as much of a pollutant as anything that may or may not be in there. So that is a concern. It released suddenly and quickly, and for a short period of time, that silt would have been in the river and would have loaded the downstream area of the river. That initial period has passed. What we've got to be really careful of, and this will have to be considered of any works, depending, certainly if we're having to remove the damaged structures, which we pretty much know we're going to have to do really to make all that safe. But then, and again, any work that we may want to do, any kind of rebuild in that river, all of those points we're going to have to very carefully consider what happens with the silt. We'll have to be involving Anglian Water very closely in that because of their abstraction downstream, and we've already had some discussion with them about that, and obviously needing to keep them informed so that they can close off their abstraction for short periods of time while that work's happening, and any more silt might get released. We'd imagine a lot of it's gone, but there probably is still some around those structures that's still held up there, I would imagine, so we have to be really careful about the disturbance of that.
Okay, thank you. And the final question, going back to 4.4 and the three options. So we've got option 1, replacement of the weir with a smaller weir, option 2, replacement of the weir structure similar, or option 3, removal of the structure and allowed to renaturalise. With option 1, is the thinking actually a smaller weir? In other words, a structure where the flow of the water can be varied by letting different amounts of water through, or is it a sill? Now, what a sill is, if I could just explain, a lot of rivers in East Anglia, the Environment Agency have put a sill in so that the salt wedge, which is the heavier salt water from the sea, doesn't creep up into agricultural land. So it's a much lower structure, and when the river's in winter, it will flow over the top of it. In the summer, it may not if the flow drops down, but it does mean your fish can pass over in winter, but they can also hide behind it. If there's a major flood, stop getting washed out. Are we talking a sill that's an immovable, basically concrete barrier that keeps the water a certain height, or are we talking a smaller height weir? And if we're talking a smaller height weir, if the Cabinet was to move to option 3, renaturalise, should the sill be put in as an alternative to renaturalising?
Another good question. So I think what we've tried to put forward is the most obvious options that people are going to ask us, and that option, what I was thinking by that, and maybe I could expand on that a little bit more, so for in the options going forward, is more of a basic weir structure that would probably need to require to have some kind of sluice function in that to allow water through as it was potentially necessary at times of high flow. The exact height of that weir, the crest, as you were, I think you were calling it, that would be open to discussion, and any structure that we put into the river would have to be fully approved with the Environment Agency from a flood perspective, so that would have to be looked at. I think the idea of this option that perhaps we want to get across is that we could rebuild like for like with the fantastic heritage structure that we had there, but it's likely to rebuild like for like, including a fish pass in that's potentially going to be much higher cost than perhaps a more basic weir with a more basic sluice structure. It probably wouldn't look as good, but might be a cheaper option to give a desired effect where you might then be able to have a sluice operation in it, hold the water higher, but not be as high a cost as a proper heritage structure. And I guess there's, looking at the consultation, there's groups that could argue all of those options with very good arguments from all sides of that. So it's kind of looking at those and weighing all these things up. And we haven't got quite the information yet ready to be able to present to you for you to be able to fully weigh up those options, I think, at the moment. But that's what our meaning was by that.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm just going to say one final thing on this, and then I'm going to invite the leader to jump in here, because ultimately it is going to land on his desk, the decision, hopefully via here first, and giving everyone a chance to see what the options are when we get there. But Fiona, I'm just going to say something on behalf of Councillor Willits, because I think he would have said this if he was here, and no doubt he will be watching at some point. He lives further upstream, and as do his residents in West Burgle, Lexton, etc. So the report that you've obtained from Environment Agency at the moment only really concentrated on the flood risk within the immediate vicinity, and I'm completely ignorant as to how this all works, but maybe when we do come to look at options, it could be explained, what does this mean further upstream? Because, driving through Argent's Lane and Spring all around there, it can be crazy. So just understanding that the borough's got a wider impact would be cool if you could, please. I think that's been a really, really decent conversation. Leader, would you like to come up and say a few words about a difficult decision that eventually you will probably have to make? And we've heard, haven't we, about potentially offers of grant funding, and there might be other options out there. And I think we all want to see action and get to walk over that bridge and see the water in use again, because we need the river to come alive with leisure users, etc. Leader.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to reflect back to you what a quality conversation we've just had. I want to thank our visitors. I'd like to have a chat to you away from this if I might, but for us here, if I can just look forward rather than twist round all the time, that was a quality conversation. Martin, thank you very much for introducing an extra element to this. It's a good example of how members can, sometimes we don't, do we, but can bring something extra. And the conversation between you all, to me as a listener, and I really was listening, it's really helpful. Thank you to our officers, because you are on this, and the impatience some may feel, as we heard from Sir Bob, we may understand it, but I know that we're doing all we can. You can't look at things before the water level's down enough for you to get close to it. You can't go faster than the best of those you can get hold of commercially can be available and do the work they've done. But there's a few things I can say. So one of those is absolutely, perhaps the most important thing, this is not this is a real exercise, right? This is a real options exercise, and as you heard from the team, there'll be, I expect them to adjust the options and review them alive to the evidence that they find and the best advice they get about the alternatives. And we have a paper in front of us which gives us a very good start point for that exercise. But evidence will drive this, and of course then we'll have to make a decision based upon cost and consequence. My sense of having dealt with the Hive recently, with Mel amongst other colleagues, is you can't underestimate how difficult it is to get progress with anything which involves regulation and a number of different agencies. So we're going to have the right kind of balance between being patient enough and impatient enough to get cooperation. But I just want to sort of say back to Councillor Scottish-Lee, I heard your observation. I will ensure that Cabinet colleagues get a flavour of today. If they haven't already, and I hope they will, they'll get it. I will pass my sense of this thoughtful conversation on. And of course, we'll be back round this again, won't we? And perhaps again before we can come to a conclusion. So there will be opportunities for all to get a real sense of the evidence and the social impacts and effects described by our colleagues behind me, which have to be part of that decision-making process. So I can't be, that's a real promise to ensure an open process at best pace. There's not much else I can add to that other than to say I'll take a personal interest in this, which will drive everybody crazy, so it'll have to be only so much and not more than is necessary or helpful. I have been talking to my highways counterpart, Councillor Tom Cunningham, as the cabinet member for perhaps the worst job in the world, which is highways. And I know him well, and he will want to be helpful, and so I'm pleased to hear that officers are talking, but he will be down in the coming weeks to walk that area with us, is my intent, and so that he sees and feels firsthand the experience and the loss and the impact, and we get the best cooperation we can out of them. I'm very clear that we have to look forward, therefore the debate around culpability is not going to help here. I think we'll enjoy it, and the lawyers really would, but it won't help very much. We have to look on this as a joint remedial exercise and just come out the other side. I'd like to look at the bridge structure as well, right alongside it in Middlesbrough Bridge on North Station Road, because that to me is neglected and quite a fine structure. So one of my side angles is to make sure that when this is over, we end up with something that looks as attractive as it could do, as well as functions in the way that's the central point of the conversation. I hope that's some help and assurance. Thank you very much. Very useful.
Thank you, Leader. Okay, that was excellent. I think we are there. Thank you, officers. Thank you, visitors, for bearing with us. You've heard the conversation. There is nothing predetermined here. We're all alive and open to options and want to see progress. We're there. So we will conclude that item, and we will now move on to the work programme to look at ahead. What else we're here for? Well, I think we'll see you again, Fiona, won't we, when we get the next report. So I think that was the vibe, wasn't it? We're going to get the opportunity to pre-scrutinise what might go to cabinet when they get to a stage where they can make a decision.
Sorry, Chair, please excuse me for 2 seconds.
Sure. Okay, right, Mr. Clark, the work programme coming up. It looks like we've got the next month off, and then we return in September. Take it away.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members will be pleased to know that I have nothing to add to the report.
Well, it was an excellent report. I'm looking forward to it all. And on that note, I conclude tonight's meeting at 9 o'clock. So it's a good start. Thanks, everyone.